Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku unlocked powers in the world of Mortal Kombat. Here is short summary. Midoriya Izuku, a quirkless boy in a superpowered society, finds his life turned on its head after the death of his father. The fate of the world rests at the end of a secret and ancient tournament, called Mortal Kombat. Izuku's dreams of being a hero catch up to him much faster than he ever expected, as he is dragged into a world of sorcery and gods beyond his wildest imagination. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. When he was 4 years old, Midoriya Izuku was told to give up. In a world of superpowers, he was told he had none. He'd never be like the heroes he admired so much. He'd never be like the other kids who surrounded him, showing off their own special skills and abilities. So many tears fell from him that night, but he couldn't even bring himself to cry. He was silent, the reality taking a long time to properly crush him. As he stared for the millionth time at the image of the greatest hero in the world, he turned to his mother and father. The first words he spoke since leaving the doctor's office. "Can I be a hero, just like All Might?" His mother and father hugged him. She was crying, but his father looked at him. Izuku would never forget the smile he gave him, as he held his wife and son. "Izuku, of course you can be a hero." It had been 3 years since the funeral. Everything seemed to be going way too fast, but maybe that was just his brain trying to accelerate through the pain. It kinda had to adapt to that. Midoriya Hisashi was dead. He was on his way to catch his flight for a business trip, but he never made it to the plane. He was found dead in an alleyway. The police say there was a fight, which wasn't surprising. Hisashi was always a fighter, and there was always that little childish section of Izuku's brain that thought his father was invincible. But everyone has their limits. The police suspect he was ambushed, as there were signs of multiple quirks being used, alongside Hisashi's own fire, but the evidence was, and still is, inconclusive. Whatever had happened, those involved were never found. Hisashi never received justice. Izuku was 13 now, washing his face from the dirt and blood after getting into another fight. Well, calling it a fight might have been being too generous. Izuku didn't much fighting, and mostly just took what was dished out. It usually ended faster if he just didn't try to protect himself. The less bruises he got, or if they were in easy-to-hide spots, then the easier it was to get home and keep them a secret from his mother. She really didn't deserve the stress of knowing her son had a bullseye on his back for being quirkless. With a clean face, Izuku took in a deep breath before he began his journey home. He could see dark clouds rolling closer, so it was probably going to rain soon. A bit off-season for rain, but nothing out of the ordinary. He just had to speed up his step, and he'd be home soon. Reaching the apartment, he arrived just in the nick of time. The first few drops of rain started dripping, quickly followed by a heavy downpour just as soon as he'd stepped under the roofed section of the building. A small silver lining to the day, those were important to hold on to. "Mom, I'm home," he called out, but was met with silence. The light in the living room was on. "Mom." He stepped closer, wondering if maybe she was elsewhere in the apartment, or if she had stepped out somewhere. But, no, as he approached the door, he could see his mom sitting at the dinner table. She looked. Izuku couldn't really describe how she looked. Distraught was much too strong, but displeased wasn't strong enough. Midoriya Izuku was not a woman who wore her rage on her sleeve, and her expression spoke of how alien the emotion was to her. And yet, the way she glared at the man sitting in front of her made no qualms about hiding it. Whoever this man was, Izuku was staring at him with hatred. That's how Izuku's brain interpreted it, anyway, which immediately put him on guard. The man himself was quite large, both in height and width. His pitch-black hair was messily tied together, but his beard was well trimmed. He'd almost resemble some strange wild man more at home living in the woods, especially since he looked very out of place inside his ill-fitting suit. "Mom," he spoke up again, startling Izuku out of her glare with the stranger. All at once, Her anger had evaporated from her eyes as she looked at him, being replaced by tears that she frantically tried to hide. Izuku, I must have not heard you come in. He stepped into the room, still very carefully eyeing the stranger as he moved to check on his mom. It's fine, I was probably too quiet anyway. A blatant lie, but he quickly moved from it to look properly at the stranger in their living room. I'm sorry, but who are you? The man took one more sip of his tea, before he stood up from the chair. It was a brief moment, but Izuku felt the man's gaze study him for only 1 or 2 seconds. Whatever he was looking for, he smiled at the end, and somehow, despite his brain telling him that this man was to be distrusted due to how his mom looked at him, the smile he gave him seemed to open up a long-forgotten memory. It's nice to see you again, Izuku. The man spoke a bit too familiarly for Izuku's liking, but the stranger chuckled as he noticed the confusion in the boy's eyes. You probably don't remember me. You were very young still. You couldn't even look over this chair, so who knows, you probably never even got to see my face. He patted his rotund belly with another chuckle, before he bowed. My name is Borai Cho. Izuku blinked, the name not immediately ringing a bell, but when it did, Wait, you're Master Cho. The man chuckled again. I knew he would have told you a thing or two. He took his seat again with a quiet sigh. It was technically meant to be a secret, but, well, I guess we're long past that now. Izuku stared at Borai Cho, only looking more confused. His father had told him very little of the Master Cho that had trained him in martial arts, but from the way he always spoke of him, it was clear Hisashi had a great deal of respect for this man. Izuku couldn't quite say Borai Cho resembled his mental image of Master Cho, but he knew appearances could always be deceiving. It's great to finally meet you. I'm sorry, if. Izuku stopped, his brain moving a mile a minute, torn between his earlier distrust to now feeling guilty for distrusting someone who his father had always said was very important to him. So, to prevent himself from short-circuiting, Izuku focused on the more pressing question at hand. Wait, secret, why would, he blinked, looking at Master Cho, and then at his mother, who seemed unable to look back at him. Borai Cho let out another sigh. Izuku, I'd always hoped my visit would come under more joyful circumstances. Izuku's mouth moved without him thinking, is it about Dad? In a way, yes, he answered. But it's mostly about you. This only further confused Izuku. But before he could say anything, his mother spoke up. You can't do this. Izuku looked down. Mom. Please, you can't do this. She kept her face lowered as she pleaded. He's all I have left, please. Now Izuku was starting to panic, quickly looking between his mother and the man he was quickly beginning to distrust. Borai Cho, however, seemed calm, but no less saddened by all of this. Inko. Your son is all we have left. He raised his head to look at the boy again. Your father wasn't native to Japan. I take it you knew this, yes? Of course. Izuku hesitated a bit in answering. He only moved here after he met my mother. Your father's real name the name we gave him after we found him, was Lu Kong, the man continued. He was raised in the Henan province in China, in a monastery belonging to the White Lotus Society. When he reached the age of 15, he was given a choice, to devote himself, and train to battle for the very fate of this world. He didn't think twice before accepting. The man looked at Izuku, but the boy was silent. The confusion was still clear in his eyes, but most of all, Borai Cho could tell the boy's patience was only growing thinner. Izuku, there is no good way of saying this. The old master stood from his chair again, but never took his eyes off of Izuku. There are forces in this world, ones that go beyond everything that you, or even I would ever dream of, and some of these forces threaten to destroy all as we know it. Your father devoted himself to fight this darkness. He endured through so much, and sacrificed even more, to take part in a tournament that would decide the fates of all souls in this realm. Mortal Kombat. The boy lowered his head, keeping his expression hidden, and his tone carefully muted. And, why are you telling me this? Borai Cho sighed. The rules of the tournament are quite clear. The White Lotus Society is guaranteed at least one participant in the tournament, but this also obligates them to take part in it. Liu Kang was chosen to participate, but now, he cannot. He took in a shaky breath, seemingly having trouble still saying that out loud. Without a participant, the White Lotus must forfeit the tournament, and award victory to its enemies. At any other time, this would be unfortunate, but now it's the worst possible outcome. If we forfeit this tournament, then there will be no more. The forces of darkness will prevail, and take this realm as their own, all because we failed to protect one of our cherished sons. Izuku didn't respond. The man took in another deep breath. But there's a way around this. The rules of Mortal Kombat make choosing another participant impossible. It was Liu Kang who signed up, and that can't be changed. But it is allowed that another of the Liu bloodline participate in his stead. You are all that's left, Izuku. Liu Kang had no other family for us to turn to. And it's with great pain, and sadness, and shame that we must come to you, and beg of you, help us in this world's darkest of hours. There was silence still, but it lasted only a few seconds. Slowly, Izuku nodded his head. I understand, and faced the bearded man with a defiant look in his eyes. You're crazy, and I'll ask you to get out of our house. Bo Raicho was quiet, but not exactly surprised. Izuku, please. I'm calling the police. Izuku quickly grabbed his phone, but still felt himself hesitating to give the man one last chance. Bo Raicho let out another sigh, turning to Inko with a short bow. I apologize for the trouble I've brought, then faced Izuku again for another bow. I'll make my leave. I'm very sorry for everything. The man turned, and as he had said, he left the Midoriya's home without another word. Izuku hugged his mother, and the rest of the evening felt like a hazy dream. A dream Izuku was content with leaving behind, and never talking about again. It was for the best. Rain kept pouring well into the night. Even as Izuku finally got into his bed, he could still hear it pour. And the last thing he heard before he drifted to sleep was the sound of thunder. Chapter text. All things considered, Izuku had slept better than he ever expected last night. So much so that he still had to remind himself yesterday had happened at all. His mother wouldn't talk about it, which was fine, because he wasn't going to talk about it either. It was best for both of them to forget Bo Raicho's visit in its entirety, and try to return to what's normal. It was still raining when Izuku woke up. According to the news, it never even stopped since yesterday afternoon. The weather reports didn't say anything about any heavy downfalls, but these kind of things could still sneak up on anyone. On the bright side, at least Izuku knew to bring an umbrella with him this time as he headed off to school. Just another day like any other. There was a flash of light, followed closely by a crash of thunder. That must have been really close by, although Izuku didn't see the lightning itself. He wasn't really looking up at the sky anyway, keeping his nose on his phone as he checked on any news. Izuku's passion still is, was, and likely would always be heroes. The world's most popular profession that brought some sense of order to the initial chaos that were the early decades of quirks. In many cases, countries were still scrambling to adjust. With well over 80% of the world's population having some kind of quirk, the abnormal had long become normal, but it was still a very touch-and-go process for several modern institutions. Izuku's path from home to school was something he easily memorized. He wouldn't say he could do it blindfolded or anything, but he was confident enough that he didn't need to pay too close attention to where he was going. He couldn't quite remember if he consciously chose this route, or if he just happened to stumble across it and figured it was as good as any. It only lasted about a minute or two more than if he took one of the main roads, but taking the main roads meant taking the more populated path. Izuku tried to stay away from as many gatherings of his fellow schoolmates as possible. As he reached the path beneath the bridge, Izuku glanced past his phone for half a second. There was no reason for it, his eyes just moved automatically to make sure he wasn't about to trip on the manhole cover or something. But if he hadn't, he might have just missed the man was there. Sitting on the ground by the wall, the man was wrapped in an old and tattered gray cloak. An old wood staff rested over his shoulder as he leaned on it, and a large reed hat covered his facial features from where Izuku was standing. It was an unusual sight, to say the least, especially nowadays. Izuku's first thought went to all those period dramas that his mother loved to watch, and the archetypes of the wandering monk who threw away his worldly possessions to live meagerly off the kindness that others gave him. But Izuku knew it was more likely this wasn't someone who had willingly chosen to remain outside on such a dour rainy day. In front of the man was a small plate, and Izuku's hand moved at his pockets immediately. He didn't have much on him. Izuku didn't like to carry around a lot of money, but he left what little he could give up to drop on the man's empty plate as he walked past. He found himself slowing down his step and glancing over his shoulder, his mind working against him and starting to worry, as he hadn't seen the man move at all. Thankfully, that weight was pushed off his mind as he saw the homeless man reach his hand to count the money, so Izuku could rest assured that he was not dead. So he returned to his usual pace, and continued to school. The problem with parting ways with all your money early in the morning was, it left Izuku without any to buy himself some food. He'd survive, of course, and he apparently managed to get away scot-free from getting any unusual stares thrown his way due to his stomach growling. Now, at the end of the day, all he had to do was pack up his things, hurry home and... Deku. Of course it wasn't so simple. His name was Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku's childhood friend, and current sort of friend maybe. They had a complicated relationship, to put it simply. What the hell is your problem? The boy growled as he slammed his fist on Izuku's desk. I barely heard anything in class because your stupid stomach wouldn't stop growling. Izuku flinched, not just because of Katsuki's outburst, but because of a very loud thunder that only seemed to have emphasized his friend's anger. I'm sorry, Kachan, it's... Damn it, Deku. He slammed his palm on the desk this time, a crackle preceding a small explosion that came from Katsuki's palm. Izuku could barely register it, however, as another thunder struck at nearly the same time. This did not slow down Katsuki in the slightest, however. Isn't it bad enough you're worthless, but you have to try and drag me down with you? That's not. Izuku shrunk in his seat. It's just, I had to skip lunch because... Why is that my problem? Katsuki quickly growled. If you want to waste away, then have the courtesy of doing it somewhere where I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I promise it won't happen. Shut the hell you. Katsuki didn't finish his threat, as yet another thunder struck, but this one with so much force that it made him actually acknowledge it. They actually felt the school tremble, the windows still left shaking even a second or two after the sound. It was as if the lightning had struck directly outside their school. What the hell's up with this damn weather? Katsuki growled. Hey, Bakugo, we should go. One of Katsuki's friends, stooges, called out from the door, where he'd been on lookout duty for any teachers. What are ya, scared of lightning? Katsuki quickly barked back, but he seemed to lose interest in Izuku anyway. Whatever, I don't have the patience for... Katsuki was interrupted by another blinding light and deafening thunder. He shouted something, but Izuku couldn't even hear it despite how close they were. There was another flash, and another roar of thunder. Almost immediately, another struck. And then, among yet another deafening thunder, there was a second noise. It took a few seconds for the bright light to diminish, allowing the three students to notice what had happened. What the hell? Katsuki actually sounded a bit shaken. Holy! The boy at the door shouted, as he watched the orange light coming from the courtyard. At least one, but most likely more of those lightnings had struck the trees on school grounds, setting them ablaze. With a panicked cry, the boy immediately turned and started running. Kachan, we have to... Izuku stood to his feet. Shut up, Captain Obvious. I know to evacuate in case of a damn fire. Another flash of light, another powerful roar. But this time there was an explosion much closer to them. The windows shattered into millions of shards, while at the same time, the roof above them collapsed. Dust and concrete followed the sickening heat, and the deafening bellow of lightning and thunder was accompanied by the crashing that surrounded him. Izuku wasn't sure what had happened. Did Katsuki grab him and threw the two of them against the wall, or did the sheer force of nature throw them there? His head was throbbing, but Katsuki seemed to be knocked out. Izuku crawled over to his friend, moving his mouth but not being completely certain if he was saying anything. His mind was focused on trying to get Katsuki out of there, Izuku forcing himself onto his hands and knees to grab him, and he froze in his tracks. Because he realized they weren't alone. Amidst the dust and rain that now poured through the hole in the ceiling, Izuku saw a figure. Very large, his thick arms stretched all the way down to the floor. The man's pale skin was covered in deep, dark marks, almost resembling the stripes of a tiger. On his shoulders stood two antennae-like protrusions, which flickered briefly with electricity. In June 1752, the man spoke. Benjamin Franklin began his experiments on the nature of electricity. These experiments revolutionized the world, and are still heralded as one of the greatest scientific achievements in human history. He turned his head, facing the boy that was frozen with a terrified look on his face. But what people fail to understand, what they still refuse to understand, is that Benjamin Franklin was nothing as measly as a scientist. He was a prophet. He hid his true spiritual purpose beneath the facade of science, for the masses would shun away his message otherwise. The man raised both his arms at his side. Lo, the great prophet. Just as Benjamin Franklin understood. Just as the ancient Greeks understood. Just as many more. To witness the true nature of lightning. To understand the true face of the storm. Did you see it? Did you see its essence? He grinned widely, even as Izuku was too frightened to answer. That power which comes from a place beyond the mortal realm, the true face of God. This is my gift to humanity. To finish what the prophet Benjamin Franklin started, and show the world the truth of lightning. You have bore witness to it. He pointed towards Izuku, and lived to tell the tale. I choose you as my apostle. This man was utterly insane. That thought helped keep Izuku steady, even as his whole body trembled in fear. There was no doubt about it, his school was under attack by a villain. Izuku's eyes shifted back and forth between the unconscious Katsuki and the villain. The madman's focus was on him alone, but he couldn't really take advantage of that with nobody around to carry Katsuki to safety. Why did this week just keep getting worse? Answer me, the villain said, his voice quickly starting to show impatience. You must have seen it. You did, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about, Izuku answered. This seemed to confuse the man more so than anger him, thankfully. Impossible, you had to have seen it. The face of God that resides in the center of his power. In the heart of each lightning, there lies the essence. You must have witnessed it. Izuku started to slowly crawl away from Katsuki, hoping to at least divert the villain's attention away, and stall for time before a hero arrived. Maybe I did, I don't know. Yes, I understand. To witness the truth can be an experience difficult to comprehend. But you must shed away the blindness imposed on you by the world. The man grinned, looking quite happy now that Izuku seemed to see things his way. Izuku found himself on the wall facing the shattered windows now, making sure the villain's back was turned to them. What should I be looking for? Maybe if you explain more, I'll remember. The man's grin softened as he nodded. Why limit myself to mere, limited words fashioned by limited beings? The antennae on his back began sparking again. First only once, but then twice as fast, and third times even faster. He was ready to summon another lightning bolt. Now, witness the full majesty of G.H. The villain was interrupted in his speech by a knee colliding against the back of his head. The figure that had crashed into him made sure to put his weight on the attack, forcing the villain to fall forward and drive his face into the floor. The man then immediately jumped off of the villain, narrowly dodging the lightning that was summoned down, with far less intensity than the prophet had wanted. We apologize for being late, Izuku. Boraicho yelled out as he rushed through the door, holding out his hand to him. Come, I will carry your friend, but you must stand and run. Let Kung Lao worry about this monster. Everything happened very fast, and Izuku's brain was slow to process it. It was instinct alone that let him take Boraicho's hand and be helped to his feet, the old master then focusing on lifting Katsuki in his arms to get everyone to safety. But before Izuku could run, the name echoed in his head. Kung Lao. He glanced aside at the man that dove in to save him. He stood up from his landing, running a hand through the brim of the large black hat worn atop his head. There was a gleam, a light that shone from the edge of his hat as he faced down the villain. There was no fear in his face, no hesitation as he took on a fighting stance. The same stance Midoriya Hisashi had shown him. Chapter text. Long, long ago, in a far, far away land, a powerful warlock held the fate of the world in his hands. Betraying his own brothers, the warlock sought to conquer the land, and offer the lives within it as sacrifice to his dark master. Many rose up in this time to defeat the warlock. The powerful, who wished to defeat the warlock. The wise, who attempted to trick him. The holy, who tried to repel the darkness that empowered the warlock. They all tried. They all failed. With his magic and cunning, the warlock defeated all who stood in his way. Noble and peasant, they all fell the same, and the land saw the end of times draw ever nearer. Until one day, a new challenger approached the warlock. He was but one of hundreds before him, 100 more powerful, more wise, and more holy than him. The monk with a name no had ever heard of, from a village no one even knew existed, faced the warlock. The warlock's power was no match for the monk's, for he had trained without rest to fight on that day. The warlock's wisdom did not save him, for the monk couldn't be tricked. And even the warlock's dark magic couldn't save him, for the monk let no harm stop him from continuing the fight. And in the end, it was not power, nor wisdom, nor holiness that defeated the warlock. It was the monk's dedication to train himself in body and mind, his focus on purging the land from that evil, and his determination that let him endure the pain to achieve that victory. From that day forward, the land came to know the name of that monk, and they thanked and praised him for centuries for his deeds. He became known as the Great Kung Lao. The roar of thunder crashed down on the school, the building trembling as its walls were forced open by the raw power of lightning bursting through, setting off more explosions. Desks and chairs were set ablaze, the fire quickly going out of control as more of the storm raged down, drawn in by the villain. The glare of sirens was still a fair distance away, and students and school staff did their best to evacuate safely, even among the chaos of the storm. It wasn't immediately apparent that the school was under attack by a villain, only some of the students mentioning seeing a pair of images locked in battle among the flames. "Do you see that? Is that a villain? Who's that guy fighting him? I've never seen that hero costume before. Kojiro-kun. Hey, where's Koji?" A furious thunder shook the ground, the lightning punching another hole to the side of the building, and only adding to the raging inferno that threatened to consume the school. Among the heat and the light of the fire, the striped villain let out a disgusted grunt. "Do you see how they gather like sheep, staring in awe at the power of nature? How stupid can you possibly be?" he shouted. "How blind must you choose to become to ignore the truth? Those who see lightning as nothing more than an ordinary phenomena must choose to do so." He swung his oversized arm, swatting aside a few desks but failing to strike his opponents. "It is so clear. It is so obvious. This power can only come from God Himse heck." He was interrupted by having a chair kicked straight at his jaw, the man quickly placing a hand as he shrieked after biting his tongue. "Your barking is starting to grow tiring." Kung Lao jumped back, dodging another swipe of the villain's arm. "Be quiet, or you'll be losing that tongue next time." The villain let out a furious growl, grabbing the chair off the ground to wield it as a weapon, swinging wildly without rhyme or reason in the hopes of catching his foe. The school's classrooms weren't particularly large to begin with, but the fire that quickly spread within it only made the space that much smaller. This did not seem to concern Lao at all, however, as he confidently jumped from desk to desk, leaping over flames if he had to keep the villain's attention on him. Seeing the electricity gathering around the villain's antennae, Lao knew what to expect. Fearsome as his quirk may be, at best the villain could only summon lightning onto him, otherwise he'd have to rely on it crashing down at random in the area the storm was gathered. This did mean Lao was at a disadvantage by staying indoors, and the mad dog knew it. The villain charged at Lao just as the lightning was summoned, bursting down even more of the ceiling, along with the wall. Lao had avoided the crumbling of concrete just in time by jumping into the hallway, taking the precious few seconds to catch his breath. He may not be very tired from exertion, but the dust and flames were making breathing a bit difficult, and even the pouring rain wasn't being given the time to properly put out the fires. He heard the villain grunt as he pushed himself back to his feet, having received some of the rubble he'd brought down directly on top of his head, but not enough to cause significant damage. Shish sheep! All of your sheep are to be slaughtered! The villain roared as he charged at Lao, but slammed into the wall when the man jumped aside. This didn't slow down the villain too much, as he furiously continued to follow Lao to try and catch him, all the while more and more sparks gathering around his antennae. Hurry, Izuku! Bo-Raicho called out to the boy, but they both were nearly shaken off their feet as another violent explosion rocked the building. Izuku wasn't sure if he was still feeling the effects of having a lightning bolt go off almost in front of his face, but something was making his legs difficult to move. He felt like he was trying to crawl through mud the more he kept following Bo-Raicho, and he couldn't understand why. He couldn't ask for Bo-Raicho's help. The man was still carrying Katsuki, and while logically speaking, Bo-Raicho could probably carry the two of them, Izuku wasn't willing to take the chance that he couldn't. He could hear the frantic yelling coming from the villain, followed by more thunder and more shaking even as Izuku and Bo-Raicho reached the stairs. He felt that muddy sluggishness overwhelm him again, his brain frantically trying to think of 100 different thoughts at once. How did it come to this? How could this have been avoided? How many were injured? How many were still? Quote dash exclamation mark question mark exclamation mark quote. Through the thunder, Izuku heard it. He was certain he did. Someone crying out for help. Izuku. Bo-Raicho yelled out, Izuku, where are you going? All of a sudden, Izuku had turned and ran back the way he came from. Someone hadn't evacuated. His legs moved all on their own, and the difficulty he had in moving just 3 seconds earlier was gone. He ran as fast as he could, trying to focus his hearing past the thunder and the quakes, and the howling of the villain, and to only hear. Help me! Izuku practically slammed his shoulder into the door as he opened it, and he didn't take long to find them. The classroom was in rough shape, with the outside wall torn down and leaving a clear view to the courtyard behind the school, and the fire was quickly spreading. The red-headed boy had his leg caught under the rubble, and it was a small miracle that's as far as his injuries seemed to go. He wasted little time in rushing to him, and began digging the rubble off of him as best as he could. Don't worry, I'll get you out of there. The smaller chunks of wall weren't very difficult to move off, but the larger piece that kept him pinned to the floor was going to be more troublesome. Izuku would never be able to actually move it off, but that didn't stop him from grabbing it from beneath, and put every ounce of whatever strength he had to try and lift it, just enough for the other boy to be able to drag his leg out of the rubble. It was a great and painful effort on both their parts, but the rush of adrenaline from the need to survive was helping to mask it. Soon enough, the boy was free, and Izuku let the chunk of wall drop, his arms feeling like they were ready to fall off his shoulders, but he wasn't going to focus on that. He took the boy's hand to help him to his feet, placing the arm over his shoulders to help him stand. But just as they started to make their leave, another loud explosion rocked them back down the floor, as a lightning had crashed on the opposite end of the room, tearing down another wall. But worse than that, it hadn't been a random lightning. The villain stumbled over the rubble, falling to his hands and knees and bellowing in frustration as he failed to, yet again, catch his opponent. Lao allowed a short smirk to appear on his face, possibly just to get under the villain's skin, but also possibly because he found it amusing to toy with him. But that smirk quickly vanished when he noticed, "What are you still doing here, boy?" He yelled at Izuku, "Go back to Cho Shifu and get out of here." Izuku flinched, his body being startled back into movement. I'm sorry. There's was someone in danger. He jolted again, taking a quick moment to check on the red-headed boy. He was fine, just a bit dazed by the explosion. Izuku would later wonder if being friends with Katsuki had just made him too used to those, but he still looked able to stand up and walk. We're going now. Please, stay safe, Kung Sa. He quickly knew his big mouth had gotten him into trouble. The villain had pushed himself to his feet, and into a furious charge, but not towards Lao. Time seemed to crawl to a standstill for Izuku, as he saw the bloodthirsty grin stuck on the villain's face as he charged towards them. But he also saw just how quickly Lao had responded, the hat he wore having been thrown in the split second it had taken the villain to move. It spun through the air like a throwing disc, its sharp metal edges brushing right past the villain's cheek to leave a scar deep enough to sting, and throw the mad dog off his focus. But the hat was now flying straight towards Izuku and the dazed boy, but only the former still had his wits about him to know the danger that posed. It was moving too fast, and all he could do was shove the boy off his shoulder to save him from a beheading. But he never had to do that. There was a subtle crackle of blue light, and the form of Kung Lao manifested before Izuku, seemingly from nowhere. Lao grabbed his hat, and in a single sweeping motion, he continued the trajectory of his body to both swing a powerful foot onto the approaching villain's face, while simultaneously placing the hat back atop his head. The villain was thrown off his course by the roundhouse kick, tumbling to the ground near the open wall with a pitiful cry. It all happened in maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, at the absolute maximum, and Izuku was left staring with his jaw dropped at the man before him. Not just the speed with which he reacted to the villain's change in tactics, but how quickly he had changed from chastising Izuku to now calmly standing in front of him. That, a teleportation quirk. Was this man a pro? Leave, now, Lao shouted to snap Izuku off whatever had bitten him. The boy flinched and frantically scrambled to push back to his feet, and drag the other boy out of the classroom. Just as he reached the door, Izuku Boraicho stopped with a heavy huff. What were you? He paused as he noticed the boy he was helping carry, and the pieces weren't hard to put together. Give me some warning next time. He moved to take the redhead off of Izuku and carry him. See Cho-san, where's your friend safe? There's teachers still in the building to help with the evacuation, leading people to the front gate now. We need to get to safety, so let's go. Izuku nodded, actually feeling very relieved, even if his brain was still thinking about the possibility of any others being left behind on the 3rd floor. He glanced back at Lao, who was keeping his focus on covering their escape, as the villain crawled back to his hands and knees. He seethed and growled in anger, and Izuku saw him reach for something on the pocket of his trousers. It was a small device, and for a brief second, he almost panicked that it was a detonator or something. But when the villain suddenly stabbed the syringe into his neck, Izuku's eyes widened in recognition. It was just as bad as a detonator. Kung Lao, run! What are you still doing here, boy? Lao fired back as Izuku was insisting on not leaving the doorway. I'll keep him busy, but you need to. Why, you don't understand. That's trigger. The look Lao gave him was pretty obvious. He didn't know what Izuku was talking about. Trigger. One of the most popular and effective quirk enhancers on the black market. Highly illegal, able to overclock someone's quirk, and turn even the most innocent of abilities into a force to be reckoned with. But they were normally only used by those with weaker untrained quirks. For someone like this man, who already held such a destructive quirk, to use it. The villain let out a quiet laugh. His eyes turned bloodshot, veins pulsating on the sides of his head and on his shoulders. Electricity gathered on the antennae atop his shoulders, much faster, and much more brightly than it ever had. The clouds in the sky above rumbled into a chaotic frenzy, lights flashing as all of their power converged onto one point, the very epicenter of the storm that stood above the villain who summoned it. Come, and meet God with me. For a brief second, the villain was engulfed with light that shone from within his own body. The bright flash was enough to stop Lao and Boraicho as their vision was impaired. Izuku was the first to raise his arms in front of him, but he did not stop. When the light diminished, the darkness before the lightning, only a small blur rushed its way towards the villain. Neither Lao nor Boraicho had the time to stop him, and before they could even shout, Izuku was already airborne. He jumped, and when he drew close, he thrust his foot in front of him to collide with the villain's face. Just like his dad had taught him. He was on the edge of a collapsed wall that overlooked a 3-story drop. It's not like Izuku had planned it. He didn't weigh whether or not he could even force the villain off the edge, let alone if it would actually help save anyone. He just ran. He ran, and now he was falling off the side of the school, along with the villain. And then, the lightning struck. You made that story up, the young boy quietly said, his back still turned to the wall as he lay in bed. Midoriya Hisashi looked down as he sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to place his hand on Izuku's head. "I suppose I did," he sighed, "but that doesn't mean the intent behind it is a lie." Izuku slowly shifted his head, glancing over his shoulder to see Hisashi smile. For millions of years, the word, special, has clung to humans as a weight. I want you to think about that. The young boy gained a slight frown on confusion, getting Hisashi to chuckle. Sorry, old habit, maybe you're a bit too young for that level of self-reflection. He stood up from the bed, but just so he could kneel beside it and be on eye level with Izuku. What I meant was, people are not extraordinary. They do extraordinary things, regardless of where they're from, who they are born of, or even what limitations are placed before them. Every life is nothing more than potential. Some have an easier time making something out of that potential, but just because something is harder, it doesn't make it impossible. Izuku rolled to face his father fully, letting Hisashi grab his hand. That's what I want you to think of, Izuku. Every time you doubt yourself, just remember, everyone has the chance to become great. You are no different. Light, everything was light, a searing, burning, blinding light. So why were his eyes wide open? Why wasn't he in pain? He could see the lightning enveloped him. Everywhere he looked, there was just more light. Was he still falling? Was he floating? Did he die? He looked at his hands, and saw the electricity shifting just above his skin. It was beautiful. He shouldn't have given up on his brief poetry phase. Maybe he could have found a way to describe it then. Slowly, he raised his head. It was curiosity, pure and simple. How many people had the chance to look into the center of lightning? He looked up, and he felt his feet touch the floor. He blinked, looking back down. He was on the floor, standing on the courtyard behind the school. The villain was there too, lying on the floor. But the hazy look in his eyes made it obvious he wasn't about to stand up again. He looked wrinkly. Izuku flinched as he saw a shape fly past him, and before he could even tell what it had been, Kung Lao had materialized in front of him, placing his hat back atop his head. The man stared down at Izuku with a stern expression. Normally Izuku would cower before something like that, but he was still much too confused to even process it. Lao then focused on the villain, checking on him briefly. HMPH, he had the electricity drained from him. He is harmless for now. Izuku blinked, looking back down at the villain, who just let out a feeble groan, looking like a man who hadn't had a drink in days. You got lucky. Lao stood back up for another stern glare to Izuku. Yu Huang Shangdi took mercy on your reckless behavior. Another blink, Izuku's stare not turning any less brainlessly dazed and confused. Huff, huff, Izuku, with the other boy delivered to a teacher, Boraicho hurried to meet Izuku and Lao, clearly looking quite tired from all the running around he'd been making. Oh, heavens, boy. Thank the gods you're safe. He grabbed Izuku and pulled him into a tight hug. Izuku, again, was just still trying to understand what had just happened. Ha, Boraicho laughed, placing the boy down on the ground with a pat on the shoulder, but what a kick that was. Your father trained you well, Izuku. But of course, he had quite a good teacher himself. Lao rolled his eyes. You shouldn't congratulate him for taking such a dangerous risk. It was pure luck that he survived. Bah, couldn't you say the same thing each time you cross the street? There is no shame in relying on a bit of luck, my son. You should know this quite well. Boraicho laughed, giving Izuku another pat on the shoulder. Besides, all I praised him for was his posture, not the way he used it. Izuku was still silent. Slowly, he blinked again, looking past Boraicho to see the rain was quickly putting out the fires now. That was a relief. A big relief. He heard the sirens on the other side of the building, and figured the firefighters could get everything under control quickly, while the police could handle the villain. Finally Izuku managed to breathe, letting out a lengthy exhale now that everything was over. His legs nearly buckled as the weight of the stress caught up to him, but he caught himself by placing his hands on his knees. He had to take a minute, or two, or maybe 30, as he got air back into his lungs, and his heart to start beating normally again. As he slowly straightened himself, his hands brushed by his pocket. Quote. Question mark quote. He blinked, reaching into the pocket, and taking something from it. He opened his palm, left staring at what rested on it. Bo Raicho noticed this, looking confused at Izuku. What have you got there, son? It's, he answered, still staring at the small, circular metal objects resting on his palm. It's my money. Chapter text. The clash of swords ended, and the sacrifice for the ravens was halted. Brother and enemy lowered their blades in honor of that great king, knowing that no other offering would match that of the fallen warrior. With blood still wet and warm, the king was raised atop a sea of shields, and carried to the mound where the pyre was lit, and the skies would open. No tear was shed on that field, as the bloodied maidens took him. For all knew that Victory Father had chosen the good king to join by his side. It still felt like a strange dream he had to wake up from each morning. But every morning he was reminded he couldn't go to school, he'd remember it actually happened. The villain attack, the storm, the lightning, that was 4 days ago, and it still simultaneously felt like it happened yesterday, as well as never happened to begin with. Nobody had died that day, thankfully, and most people came out of there with only a few minor injuries. School had to be cancelled for the moment, as they inspected the damage and began working on reconstruction. This was a small blessing for Izuku, since that meant he could spend more time with his mom. Midoriya Izuku tried to hide it, but she was beside herself with grief after nearly losing her son. She was strong, so she'd regained most of her usual good cheer in just these few days, but Izuku still wasn't sure if he felt comfortable leaving her alone. Unfortunately, this clashed with something Izuku wasn't sure he could leave alone either. He didn't see Bo Raicho and Kung Lao after that day, and it wasn't helping his brain to stop obsessing over questions he had no answers to. Why did the villain attack his school? The media had identified him as Ragu Yusuke, a man just recently released from prison. Originally, he was little more than a petty thief, with a quirk that could only draw in lightning to himself. He had no ability to actually conjure storms as he showed. The police suspect he had either injected himself with multiple doses of trigger prior to the attack, or perhaps worse, there's some kind of new type of trigger on the market. Yusuke hadn't been very cooperative, mostly just spouting delusional rambles that nobody could really decipher. Apparently, Yusuke was actually an alumni from Izuku's middle school, but was expelled after stabbing a teacher. The media has theorized that was the reason he chose Aldera Middle School as his target, but that was pure speculation. Yusuke himself had never singled out the school in his ramblings, and he barely ever mentioned it during his first time in prison. And of course, there was the detail of what he'd told Izuku, something the media couldn't know, as he'd agreed to keep quiet about it after Bo Raicho asked him. Bo Raicho didn't seem too sure if Yusuke really was there after Izuku, or if he was just a madman and Izuku drew his attention for reasons that would only make sense in a madman's brain. Lao didn't seem too convinced. That man was himself the source of many questions for Izuku. Try as he might, he couldn't find any information on a hero named Kung Lao anywhere, but that couldn't be a coincidence, right? He'd called Bo Raicho his Shifu. His fighting style was the exact same. Izuku had no doubt that he must have trained with Midoriya Hisashi. Or, he supposes as he would have been known then, Liu Kang. But did this Kung Lao name himself after father's story, or did his father name the great monk after someone he knew? And for that matter, why were Lao and Bo Raicho at his school to begin with? It was the end of the day, so maybe they were hoping to talk to him more about his father, and this tournament or whatever. Neither men stuck around to deal with the press, and their request for Izuku to keep details vague indicated they were people who didn't want to be in the spotlight. Were they underground heroes, or even vigilantes, maybe? But more than all of this, more than every question he had about the villain, about Bo Raicho, about Kung Lao, the question at the foremost top of his brain was, what happened after I was struck by the lightning? The man in front of him looked shocked. How did you find this address? Lao asked, clearly not expecting to find Izuku standing at the doorway, and to just open up with that question. Relax, my son. Bo Raicho was quick approach, I gave him my card before we parted ways, so he could choose to find us. Lao let out a gruff sigh, clearly displeased. You're too reckless, Shifu. We're supposed to be hiding, so you shouldn't. Bo Raicho quickly waved his hand to interrupt another sermon. Yes, I know, but relax. It all worked out in the end, didn't it? Ignoring any further attempts at an argument, Bo Raicho stepped aside to let Izuku inside. Sure, this was probably not the best idea Izuku had ever had, which was saying quite a bit considering he nearly died just a few days ago. The apartment complex Bo Raicho and Lao were staying in was cheap, and the inside was as Spartan as they came. These two were clearly planning on having a short stay in the city, and they'd chosen somewhere that wouldn't draw much attention, and was relatively secluded. So for him to willingly accept to step inside, alone, and still thinking that at least Bo Raicho was missing a screw or two, would be a level of reckless even Izuku wasn't sure he could reach. Bo Raicho quickly noticed the second-guessing going on inside Izuku's brain, so he quickly chimed in. I'll get my coat. I know a place we can talk. Shifu, it'll be too dangerous to talk about any of this in public. Grabbing his coat, Bo Raicho was already stepping past Lao, shrugging his shoulders. Then you're free to stay silent, if you wish. He gave Lao a pat on the shoulder as he smirked, before he started leading Izuku away. Lao grunted, quickly stepping inside to grab his jacket before following the two, closing the door behind him. The nearby park was a more acceptable compromise. It wasn't very densely populated at this hour, but it was surrounded by a number of buildings. It didn't make the situation feel any less awkward for Izuku. But that could just be because he was sitting alone with Lao, who wasn't saying a single word. He was dressed in a simple black suit, looking more at ease inside of it than Bo Raicho did his. He would have blended into just about any crowd, were it not for his large circular hat that now hung over his back. Lao was just looking around them with incredible focus, clearly on the lookout for any potential threats. Bo Raicho had insisted he'd go fetch them all something to drink, and neither of them could stop him. So, now they were here. In dead silence. Kung-san. Izuku meekly spoke at last, all of his defiant energy from earlier seemingly having evaporated the moment he had time to properly think. Did you know my father? Lao glanced at Izuku for a moment, and seemed like he wasn't in any mood to have a conversation. I knew him, yes. It was a start. Did you train with him under Cho-sensei? I only asked because you called him Shifu, and my father would sometimes call him that too, which is obvious since it's just the Chinese word for master, and Dad would sometimes slip into speaking Chinese without really thinking about it, and English too sometimes, but I remembered him once saying that his Cho-sensei didn't take on many students, so I figured if you were his student, and you look about the same age Dad would be, then it seemed logical to assume. You're rambling. Izuku flinched, lowering his head. Sorry, I do that sometimes. So did your father. Izuku looked back up at Lao, the man looking around them again for any sign of danger. It was difficult to tell through Lao's excellent poker face, but Izuku now had to wonder how close he may have been with his father. Were they friends once? Rivals? Your name? Lao faced Izuku again, not saying a word, but the stern look on his face still got Izuku to flinch. That is, what I wanted to ask was, he stumbled over his words, trying to think of the best way to even ask something he knew was a bit dumb. It's just, my father used to tell me this story, and I was wondering, are you the great Kung Lao? The man didn't say anything, and his expression didn't really change either. But Izuku could just feel the air change around them, as if Izuku had just stepped on a landmine. Lao's eyes narrowed, Izuku seeing his fingers curl up into fists. When he actually answered, it was as blunt and cold as a sledgehammer made of ice. No, the great Kung Lao is dead. He has been for a very long time. To say the tensions were rising would be an understatement, and Izuku felt like he should immediately get on his hands and knees and apologize for bringing up a subject that clearly hit Lao somewhere close. He couldn't actually move, however, just suffocating under the man's intimidating presence after getting a taste of what he was capable of in a fight. Thankfully. Apologies for that. Bo Raicho returned, carrying 3 cans in his arms. Had to find a blasted machine that actually worked. I really ought to file a complaint before leaving, for the sake of. As soon as he placed down Lau's iced tea, the man swiped it and stood up from his seat, quickly walking away. Lau, where are you going? Patrolling the perimeter, was all he answered as he walked away. Bo Raicho scratched his head, but quickly took his seat. Apologies for young Lau. He can be quite paranoid when he wants to. He placed Izuku's orange juice in front of him, and then quickly opened his own beer. It was my fault. Izuku took his beverage and tried to look past Bo Raicho drinking alcohol at 9 in the morning. I asked him about a story my dad used to tell. About the great Kung Lao. Izuku blinked. How did you know? There are many things that get Lao in a bad mood, but few that leave him as angry as being reminded of his great ancestor. Bo Raicho took a sip from his drink. Ancestor, Izuku said. So, the story's actually real. Bo Raicho nodded. Well, some details aren't quite all there. The version Kong would tell was the one he was taught at the monastery. It is an old story, not very famous nowadays, but still told in many different ways. But the intent remains the same. The story of a great man who did the seemingly impossible, despite no one believing he could. He let out a quiet sigh. It is a story young Lao has heard all his life, and it has brought him much grief to try to live up to it. Izuku shrunk slightly in his seat. I should apologize when he gets back. Don't worry yourself too much. You couldn't possibly have known, and Lao knows this. Just give him some time to clear his head. He's actually quite sensible underneath that face of few friends. Bo Raicho tried to pick up Izuku's spirits, but he knew they still had other business to attend to. For now, we should focus on you. And the many questions I am sure you have. That was an understatement, and they both knew it. And while Izuku was sure earlier about where to start, now that he had the time to calm down, he was lost on what to ask first. So the only option was to not ask a question. I want you to tell me everything. Bo Raicho blinked, as Izuku's determination became clearer on his face. Tell me about Mortal Kombat. Chapter text. Eons ago, the elder gods created the realms, the uncountable worlds that give shape to reality. For millennia, these worlds were kept separated by powerful magic barriers, and the peace between realms was maintained by the elder gods chosen, the guardian gods. But this harmony between worlds was violently shattered. One of the guardians obtained the forbidden knowledge of not only traversing the realms by his own power, but to also mold and shape the very fabric of reality, and merge the separate worlds with his own. Driven by an insatiable hunger for power and wealth, the rogue guardian ravaged through countless realms with his armies, expanding his dominion by crushing all opposition in his path. The realms prayed to the elder gods for assistance, and they answered. They created Mortal Kombat. The sacred tournament was put in place to give the realms a fighting chance against any invasion from the outer worlds. The rules change depending on the host realm, but the principle remains the same. Champions from each world fight for either the freedom of their home, or the conquest of another realm. After 10 straight victories, the winner is decided. This did little to stop the rogue guardian's assimilation of the worlds, as his champions laid waste to their opposition in each tournament, and many more realms fell into his hands. It didn't take long before his sights fell onto the realm of Earth. To see to it that the rules of Mortal Kombat were upheld, the Order of Light was placed in charge of hosting the tournament. One of Earth's most ancient religious and spiritual orders, they vowed to maintain the integrity of the tournament's laws. For centuries, Earth's champions traded wins with the Outworlders, neither side gaining the lead. It took one of Earth's own to betray them for the invaders to taste victory. His name, as he appeared then, has long been lost to time. To those who still know of the legends, he is known only as the demon sorcerer, traitor of the realm. Selling his soul to the rogue guardian, the demon sorcerer obtained even greater power than he already wielded, and his dominance in the tournament began. For 8 straight tournaments, the demon sorcerer bested Earth's finest champions, and total victory drew ever nearer for his dark master. But just as the demon sorcerer seemed unbeatable, his 9th tournament would prove otherwise. A young monk from a small monastery owned by the White Lotus Society shocked the tournament, as he put a stop to the demon sorcerer's winning streak, etching his name into legend as the Great Kung Lao. His life was spared, but the demon sorcerer attempted 2 more times to defeat the Great Kung Lao in the tournament, and twice more he was defeated. The sorcerer's dark master forbade him from participating, and cost them any more loses, and it was said that the demon sorcerer was executed for his repeated failure, but this was all part of the rogue guardian's insidious plan. Patiently biding his time, the rogue guardian postponed the tournaments for as long as he was allowed to, as he had his new champion trained in secret. Not long after the supposed execution of the sorcerer, the Order of Light accepted into their midst a wandering monk, named Shang Tsung. At the time, they had no way of knowing his true nature, and for decades, Shang Tsung would rise among the ranks of the order. As soon as he became a candidate to take the position of Grand Master, that's when the great elders of the order began dying under mysterious circumstances. It didn't take long before Shang Tsung was not only placed at the head of the order, but he became the sole judge of the Mortal Kombat tournament. Shang Tsung now held all the power, and the Outworlders' new champion was ready to begin an unprecedented dominant streak, the Rogue Guardian's newest acquisition, Prince Guro of Shokan. The denizens of the once great realm of Shokan are some of the most fearsome and powerful beings in reality, and by being trained by Shang Tsung and the Rogue Guardian himself, Guro became an unstoppable force of nature. Even the great Kung Lao could do little before such a foe, and Earth's final hope was shattered. The great Kung Lao was defeated, and the Outworlders began their reign of terror once again. The truth was clear, and Shang Tsung was revealed as none other than the demon sorcerer himself, but it was too late. As Grand Master of the Order of Light, he had the right to maintain his seat of power, regardless of how he had obtained it. Shang Tsung proceeded to change the rules of the tournament, further stacking the odds in Guro and his Dark Lord's favor, but his eagerness to destroy the integrity of the tournament got the attention of the Elder Gods. They decreed that every tournament would require at least 1 entry of the White Lotus Society, and forbade any interference by Shang Tsung or any of his associates to interrupt their training, or sabotage them in any way. While their intentions were good, it did little to prevent Shang Tsung's manipulations. Over the centuries, his corruption of the tournament only grew bolder, and even those of pure heart who could withstand his machinations and temptations were still faced with an insurmountable wall. Guro, the champion of Mortal Kombat, has stood victorious for over 1,000 years, earning his Dark Master's 9 straight wins in the tournament. Now, with a new tournament fast approaching, Earth has but one more chance to overthrow Guro, and reset the tournament cycle. If they fail, then Earth will belong to the Outworlders, and their tyrannical emperor, at long last. You still don't believe me? Bo Raicho sighed. Sorry, it's just a lot to process. Bo Raicho shook his head. You needn't apologize, young Izuku. I'd probably be more worried if you didn't take this story with some degree of skepticism. He took a sip from his beer. This is a complicated situation for everyone involved, no doubt about it. Thanks to Shang Tsung's manipulation of the tournament rules, the White Lotus can't simply choose another of their students to take Kang's place. The only leeway Shang Tsung has given us is to have another member of the Liu bloodline take his place, but my father was an orphan, so I'm the only one you could turn to. Izuku finished the thought for him. Another sigh left Bo Raicho. If there was any other alternative, I know, Izuku said. I mean, I know this sounds weird, since I still don't even know how much of this I even believe, but he couldn't even finish that sentence. Something told him Bo Raicho was telling the truth, that whether or not any of this was real, the only reason they even came to him was because that was the only option they had. Which made absolutely no sense, but it's what his brain was telling him was right. There was silence, Izuku being unsure what to say to follow up all of that, and Bo Raicho having no intention of trying to force Izuku into the conversation any further. A few seconds passed, and Izuku's whole demeanor seemed to change, as instead of that awkward and uncertain look in his eyes, he suddenly pinched his lower lip and gained a more pensive expression. Then, if this sorcerer, Shang Tsung, he started musing out loud, if he's this close to winning, do you think the villain that attacked my school was after me? To stop me from entering the tournament? Bo Raicho blinked, but answered. Lao believes so. I'm Not quite so sure of it myself, but I can't exactly say it would be beneath a snake like Shang Tsung. Then, if he tried to send someone after me. Izuku's free hand was curling around his soda can, clearly starting to bend it from the pressure. Then was my dad. At this, Bo Raicho gained a troubled frown. Again, I cannot say it would be beneath Shang Tsung. But I find it highly doubtful. Izuku, you must understand. Shang Tsung's protege has remained undefeated for 9 straight tournaments. No one has ever even come close to defeating Guro. Your father, he was an excellent warrior, one of the greatest students I've ever had the honor of training. But, he sighed, I don't believe Shang Tsung would have found him worthy of putting his victory at risk by getting him killed. If there was even the slightest of proof of his involvement in Kang's death, everything he's worked for in the past 1,000 years would be for nothing. The sad truth is, these things happen. Sometimes, people die for no other reason than being at the wrong place, at the wrong time. Nothing more about it. The growing tension in Izuku's eyes slowly vanished. Or, more accurately, he deflated as he had to try and face the possibility of Hisashi's death being a completely random and meaningless act of violence. It was a difficult thing to admit to himself, especially when it all just sounded so perfectly convenient for his enemies to suddenly see him gone, but Izuku couldn't ignore Bo Raicho's logic against the idea either. He wasn't even sure how to feel about trying to find the logic in any of this. 1,000-year-old sorcerers, evil otherworldly conquerors, and ancient all-powerful gods, it was too much to absorb. Cho-san, I'm sorry, he sighed. I still don't know what to think about any of this, but I don't think I can help. Bo Raicho slowly nodded his head. You need proof. I understand that. I'm sorry. No, Izuku, I'm the one who should apologize. There was much debate, and the decision fell on me whether to tell you any of this, or to remain silent. I chose the former, knowing the risk. I figured, given the circumstances, that it was worth a try. He stood up from his seat with a quiet sigh. I cannot lie and say this doesn't sadden me, but it is what it is. I cannot blame you for any of it. Nobody should find themselves in your position, Izuku. The fact you've even given us the opportunity to explain this much is more than we could have ever asked of you. Izuku shrunk slightly in his seat, his brain locked in a tug of war with itself over his logical side telling him this was all a bunch of lies and the ramblings of a bunch of crazy people, and his emotional side feeling guilty that he wasn't able to believe in any of this, and was possibly dooming the whole world because of it. If that didn't make him feel like the craziest person in the world, he didn't know what would. There's just one more question. Izuku took in a short breath. Why did my father change his name? Was it because he was hiding? Bo Raicho blinked. On the contrary, Izuku. He answered, your father devoted most of his young life to train for Mortal Kombat. That was Liu Kang, the monk who traveled the world, being taught by the greatest teachers in the fighting arts that there are. When he met your mother during a trip to Japan, that's when Liu Kang began thinking about who he wanted to be, when he no longer had Mortal Kombat to fill his life. He was quite the optimist, your father. He was always thinking about what he would do after his victory. And he decided that Liu Kang alone would worry about Mortal Kombat, and that Midoriya Hisashi could devote himself to his wife and son. And when the day came that he'd reach the 10th victory, then Liu Kang could finally rest in peace. Izuku didn't say a word, but a soft smile appeared on his face. Of course, he couldn't be sure if Bo Raicho was even telling the truth. He knew that, but, well, it felt real in that moment. As Bo Raicho made his exit, Izuku barely heard him say his goodbyes. He just saw the man walking away to meet with Lao, whose stoic expression grew dim as he realized they had failed in their mission. Izuku felt his chest churn again with guilt, but what was he supposed to do? Go off with a pair of strangers to who knows where, to train for who knows how long, for a tournament that may or may not even exist. It was ridiculous no matter how he tried to put it. So he just sighed, and started the process of pushing all of this out of his mind. He pulled his soda closer, and finally opened it to have a sip. And then there was thunder. And Izuku was engulfed in a blinding light. It lasted only a few seconds, but he was still shaken. And so was his soda, which was just pouring foam out of the can as Izuku remained frozen in place. It took his brain a few seconds before it could properly process the information being given to him by his eyeballs, before he realized he was nowhere near the park anymore. In fact, he didn't seem to be anywhere anymore. All around him were rolling clouds, like he was stuck in a dense fog in the middle of a windstorm. He could hear distant thunder, as sparks of electricity danced on the cloudy fog around him, reminding him of what had happened during the villain attack and reminding him that he totally forgot to ask about that a second time. He wasn't sitting on a chair anymore, and it felt more like he was floating in the air instead, but that was silly, right? If he didn't know any better, he'd say he was literally floating among the clouds. But that was even sillier. Slowly, Izuku turned his head downward. And, sure enough, he could see what he felt pretty confident was Japan. All of Japan, seen straight from above. Eek! A tiny squeak left Izuku's throat, and the only reason it didn't turn into a scream of pure panic was because it got interrupted by the roll of thunder. He felt his insides jump from the sensation of being this close to something this powerful, even if it didn't seem to hurt nearly as much as it sounded like it should have. He felt the clouds move and twist around him, actually physically turning him around as he hung helplessly in the air, getting him to face the massive wall of gray clouds that were approaching. There was a flash of light that came from within those clouds, following by another drum of thunder. And Izuku saw it. The shadow inside the clouds, visible only as each lightning struck, and each thunder bellowed. There was something inside those clouds, something that the very depths of Izuku's being was reacting to. Panic, dread, fear, awe. None of these words came close to define the turmoil of emotions that overwhelmed the boy. He could barely move, let alone speak. He couldn't even breathe as his eyes remained frozen on that giant shadow that approached from within the lightning storm. And then, Midoriya Izuku, they spoke. The storm spoke. My patience grows thin. I saw fit to save your life because I hoped that you would realize the gravity of what is at stake. And yet, you insist on evading that which you know is your responsibility. Izuku's mouth moved, but no sound came from it. The clouds continued to rumble and twist around him, powerful gusts of wind threatening to send him hurling into the distance, but never succeeding as if he were caught by the very presence of the storm. I allowed Boraicho to handle things his way, to deliver the news as easily as he could. But we are beyond gentleness. This world, and every life within it, is in danger. And I will not allow it to kneel without a fight because of your indecision, Midoriya Izuku. His eyes were filled with water, and Izuku was pretty sure his heart had completely stopped beating for a second or two. And yet, he couldn't pry his eyes away from the storm, even as every word that came out of it shook him to his very core with the sheer power of its sound. He moved his lips again, and he couldn't even be sure if he had made a single sound among the storm that raged around him. Not until it confirmed he had asked his question. You know who I am. All mortals know, regardless of their faith in me. You are the one covering your eyes to that truth. Open your eyes, witness me, and tell me who I am. Izuku's eyes widened as the storm grew fiercer. He saw the lightning arc around him, slithering through the clouds like snakes, and gathering in the epicenter of the storm. It covered the shadowy giant inside, coalescing at the center of two burning eyes that bore straight through him. All of a sudden, Izuku's mind was flooded with names that he had heard all his life, from family, acquaintances, strangers, TV shows, and history books, and many more he had never even heard of before, and couldn't even begin to pronounce. So many names that overlapped, that changed and shifted, becoming a cacophony of soundless noise within his brain. He knew what this was. He knew what he was facing. But as more and more names thrust themselves into his thoughts, the harder it became to say a single one of them. He was terrified. Maybe he didn't want to say it. But he had to. In a desperate move, Izuku pushed past the storm, and the infinite names that assaulted his brain, and just before his mind could break, he grabbed a single name, the one that stood out to him among the pandemonium. Raiden-sama. Izuku could swear he'd seen the storm smirk. Good answer. The figure raised his staff, and slammed it down against the clouds. Thunder echoed like a powerful roar, as the clouds scattered like waves, and completely engulfed Izuku in their impenetrable fog once more. All was gray again. Chapter text. There's no more need to be afraid. Do you know why? All Might. Because I am here. Only a select few names dominated the conversation of who the greatest hero of all time was, and even fewer could match the number of support behind All Might as the rightful owner of that title. Everyone had their favorite hero, but few denied that All Might, the symbol of peace, was in a league all of his own. Izuku certainly wouldn't deny it. He'd probably be one of the most fervent supporters of it. For as long as he could remember, All Might had dominated a good portion of his brain power one way or another, be it playing pretend with his mom and dad, practicing his best impressions for contests, and dreaming about the day he could follow in his hero's footsteps. Most people called him an otaku, and maybe, definitely, they were right, but what was so wrong about idolizing someone like All Might? Someone whose mere presence could put people at ease even in the darkest of hours, that fearlessly threw himself into danger solely for the sake of others, and who confidently let everyone know that he'd save the day. That was the kind of man Izuku had always wanted to be. A hero, and he used to believe there was nothing stopping him from doing so. Izuku was sweating bullets. He was pretty sure he'd lost at least half the water in his body by this point, and it was sheer terror that was keeping him from passing out, or worse. His eyes slowly scanned the room he was currently in. It was large, but not gigantic, maybe twice the size of his apartment's living room. The decoration was kept simple, but still had a few ancient weapons hanging on the wall, and various scrolls and old tomes stored carefully on shelves. There were strange idols, amulets and other items that'd take a crack team of archaeologists and historians to be able to decipher the purpose of, so a random middle school student could hardly even guess at it. Beneath Izuku was a very large carpet, adorned with strange designs, all surrounding a circle that held the silhouette of a dragon's head. Atop the dragon symbol was a small table, and 2 pillows on the ground, with Izuku kneeling atop one of those pillows as he waited. His eyes moved again, this time daring to look at the corner of the room which resembled, well, there was no way to put it, a fully stocked, modern kitchen area that clashed pretty significantly with the very traditional room he was in. But while that was surprising, even a little comical in hindsight, Izuku's brain was much too focused on stressing out as he watched the figures in the kitchen area. The one he recognized, the man he'd met under the bridge, clad in pristine white robes, silver-like hair draped over his shoulders, and the large reed hat that cast a seemingly permanent shadow above his facial features. As well as 2 women who both wore similar white robes, but highlighted with vividly red marking that almost seemed to shine, as if rubies had somehow been used inside the fabric. They reminded him somewhat of a standard Miko's robes, but less uniform in coloration, deep black hair that one held tied in a braid down her back, but the other kept simple and cut just above her shoulders, and both of them had what he first thought were porcelain masks, but quickly realized to be some kind of face paint that matched their robes' colors. After a few minutes of the 3 figures talking amongst one another, they quickly made their preparations. The man with the reed hat grabbed hold of the tray, and made his way towards Izuku, smiling proudly as he placed the tray down on the table. "My apologies for the wait," he spoke as he took a cross-legged seat across the table. "I tried to time our encounter with the time it would take to finish cooking, but, well, it didn't quite work out." The man chuckled, and Izuku made sure to keep his mouth shut tight about how he could still smell the burnt dough from when they'd arrived. "Luckily," the man continued, motioning behind him to the braided woman, who was going back to manipulating the air currents indoors to get rid of all the smoke, "my daughter, Kay's, is there to cover for my mistake. She is an excellent baker, even if her humility prevents her from admitting it." To say this was a violent shock to the system after everything he's been through was an understatement. Izuku knew full well the man standing before him was the same entity he'd met just a few minutes earlier. The booming, terrifying thunderstorm that had taken him was now taking the form of a kind, soft-spoken man, speaking in a hoarse voice and very difficult-to-place accent. Izuku wasn't even sure if he was speaking Japanese, even if he had no trouble understanding the man. But then again, it wasn't a mere man he was faced with. He could still sense it. That same feeling that spoke to something deep into his soul. Something that made it impossible to deny what he felt, even as illogical as it may sound to his ears. Izuku was in the presence of a god. His brain still rumbled with all these names he could have called him: Izanagi, Zeus, Susanoo, Yu Huang, Yahweh, Thor, Ramanu, and this wasn't even a fraction of what he could actually remember. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd chosen to call him what he ended up calling, but Midoriya Izuku. Eat. The man motioned at the tray. Izuku's brain had to catch up again. He was meeting God. And God was offering him orange juice, and freshly baked animal crackers. Quote. Exclamation mark. Quote. Izuku jolted. Oh, yes. My deepest apologies, Raiden-sama. Izuku quickly and stiffly bowed, feeling compelled to demonstrate his complete and utter shame before God. Raiden, for his part, just chuckled. Do not apologize to me, but your stomach. You forgot to eat breakfast this morning in your hurry. How did? Izuku stopped, his shoulder sagging in shame at what he was about to ask. Of course he'd know that. He's God. Another quiet chuckle came from Raiden. We could hear your stomach growling while the food was prepared. It doesn't take a god to know what that means. Izuku flinched, his face gaining some color again, but unfortunately it was the color of shame. He mumbled an apology and picked up one of the cookies to take a bite, not even thinking about focusing on the taste. It could taste like dry bricks for all he cared. He wasn't going to tell God that his daughter's cookies tasted awful, and he was confident he could stop his stomach from puking on God's carpet in the worst-case scene. Izuku's eyes snapped wide open. These are delicious, he said, pretty sure that the phrase, slice of heaven, could never have been said more literally before or since, and mentally kicking himself for not taking the opportunity to do so. Told you so, Raiden said with clear amusement in his voice, looking over at his daughter. Izuku couldn't be sure if his eyes were playing tricks on him, since she was wearing face paint and all, but he could almost swear he'd seen her blush. And of course, do not forget to drink. Raiden reminded Izuku. I ruined your carbonated soda, but I think you will find this a suitable replacement. Izuku didn't need to be told twice, his hand immediately moving to the glass of orange juice to take a lengthy drink. And sure enough, it was poetry in liquid form that brought tears to Izuku's eyes. Literally, he was crying. That's how good the orange juice was. This is ambrosia, unquestionably. Raiden let out another chuckle. No. You are much too young to taste that yet. He corrected, but the oranges came from Aim's own personal garden, so thank her for her gardening skills. He motioned to his other daughter, who kept a very stoic look on her face, only giving a short nod of her head at the compliment. Somewhat surprising, even for Raiden, Izuku actually did so. Aim-sama, Kei's-sama, thank you for this meal, from the bottom of my heart. You are welcome, Aim quietly said. It's no biggie. Kei's responded a bit more casually. Raiden glanced aside at them, then at Izuku. What, do I not get thanked? Thanked for what? Kei's teased, for the guardian god of the earth realm getting the smell of burnt food all over the place. Raiden flinched at this. Well, it was still my idea. Is that really something to be thanked for, father? Aim said, her stoic voice only partially masking her amusement. I would say it is worth at least a mention. Raiden half-heartedly argued, clearly knowing he was fighting a losing battle. Izuku had absolutely no idea what to make of any of this. He was sitting in God's home, eating a meal prepared by his daughters, all while they argued with one another like it was nothing. He'd probably start questioning his own sanity, but he was far too entranced by the heavenly food in front of him still. His brain could never conceive of something so majestic and delicious on its own, no matter how mad it might get. It was all the proof he needed that everything he was experiencing was real. But the fact he wasn't freaking the hell out was probably indication he'd gone at least a little insane. Now then, on to more pressing matters. Izuku blinked as Raiden focused back on him. I am afraid this is more than a friendly visit, Midoriya Izuku, we have much to discuss. Much of it in regards to the tournament. Finally, Izuku was met with a force that got him to slow down eating, but not yet strong enough to get him to stop completely. Right, he was starting to feel that weight in the air return, as he remembered the god's words to him prior to this. Raiden was quiet for a moment, staring at Izuku from beneath the shadows cast by his headwear, making it impossible to even take a guess at his thoughts. You have heard the story already. Everything that Boraicho has told you is true. And I have brought you here to give you the proof, not that you needed it, of course. Izuku flinched at that comment. That's, oh of course I believe now, but. You can lie to yourself, Midoriya Izuku, but all that does is waste my time. Raiden interrupted, his voice still held just above a whisper, yet commanding Izuku's attention more than any shout would. You had no problem accepting Boraicho's words, when you discovered the possibility that you could confront your father's murderer. Izuku felt another icy dagger stab him, followed by a brief feeling of frustration. That's not. Can you say that you would have declined, had Boraicho lied to you? Had he told you that Shang Tsung orchestrated the death of Liu Kang, would you have still walked away? Izuku wanted to answer, but he felt something in his throat stopping him from saying anything. You knew it to be true from the start. Perhaps because of the stories your father would tell you, disguised as mere fairy tales he'd create, but that he would do so without stuttering, without needing to stop and think for a single second. Or perhaps you saw the genuine desperation in Boraicho's eyes, heard the truthful sadness in his voice as you declined, but you knew. And you still declined. Raiden's voice had never raised once, but Izuku felt the weight of every word he spoke fall right on top of him. To accept the call to action was too frightening, too complicated, but revenge. That's so much simpler. Izuku's body moved before he'd even thought about it, as he suddenly stood up in indignation. That's not. He stopped himself for a moment, not even thinking that he was now glaring at God with more anger than he'd ever thought he'd ever shown. That isn't. Again, he stopped himself, but he felt something bubble up within him more, before his mouth moved again without giving any thought to who he was saying this for. What gives you the right to judge me over this, when my father's dead because of all of this? Your father's death had nothing to do with the tournament. Raiden did not waste a second, answering Izuku with the same quiet tone he'd held the whole conversation. Then why? Izuku asked. Raiden's answer was immediate. I do not know. This nearly knocked Izuku's air right out of his lungs. What do you mean, you don't know? Why, you're God, aren't you? You have to know. Gods see much, Midoriya Izuku. Raiden calmly explained, but they do not see all. Omniscience is but one of many concepts created by mortals to explain that which they have no way of understanding. There are shadows that even the elder gods cannot pierce. Izuku clenched his teeth, but found himself unable to really argue that point. Then how do you even know Shang Tsung had nothing to do with it? It is precisely because I do not know who was involved that I can say for certain it was not Shang Tsung. I have kept my attention on the sorcerer and his minions for centuries to ensure they would uphold our agreement, and not interfere with the White Lotus. I assure you, they could not make a move without me knowing so. An uncertain growl left Izuku, the anger that was fueling him quickly sapping away, but still stubbornly trying to cling to it. Why didn't you watch over him then? If he was that important, then even if Shang Tsung tried anything, you could have saved him. No, I could not. Raiden sighed. The fates of men are for men alone to travel. No one else should have the authority to change that. Not even the gods. Izuku grew quiet again, but more out of confusion. But you saved me, didn't you? Everyone gets one miracle, Midoriya Izuku. Raiden answered, quietly and solemnly. That is a mercy I am willing to give. He didn't answer right away. Izuku stared at the god in front of him, unable to ignore the heavy tiredness in his voice, and a part of him wanted to ask Raiden more. But he couldn't. He let himself fall back down, and take his seat on the floor, still silent. After a moment of silence, Raiden sighed once more. I know nothing I could say could justify this tragedy for you. You have every right to hate me, Midoriya Izuku, and I do not ask for your understanding or forgive. No, Izuku spoke up, raising his head to look at Raiden. I mean, I'm not angry. Maybe I should, I don't know, but, even if I don't understand it, I believe in you. He slowly managed a shaky smile to appear on his face, if only to try and get his mind of how much it all still hurt. I think I heard the truthful sadness, like you said. Raiden stared at Izuku for a few seconds, before a small smile appeared over his lips. You have a talent for that. You got it from your mother. Izuku's stance had considerably relaxed, and he'd even let out a small embarrassed chuckle at the compliment. But it was obvious to him that the conversation was far from done, and Raiden knew it. Midoriya Izuku. He spoke. What the White Lotus asks of you is a daunting responsibility, even for the mightiest of warriors. There is no shame in turning one's back to it. What bothers me is that this is not what you want to do. There is uncertainty in your heart each time you deny it, and it's that same uncertainty that prevents you from fully letting it go. Izuku lowered his head again. I want to help. I know I do. If the world's in danger, of course I want to help. Helping people. Anyone. It's all I've ever wanted. If there's anything at all that I could do to help, let alone save the world, all I want to do is to just say yes. And what is stopping you? Izuku slowly raised his head, one of the most strained smiles stuck on his face, even as tears were starting to form in his eyes. I don't think I can. Come on, let's play. The young aimed a finger at himself. I'll be All Might, obviously. Katsuki-kun, you're always All Might. Another boy with brown hair argued. Of course, because I'm the best, he boasted. Tsubasa, you can be the villain this time. The winged boy nodded. Okay. The brunette just shrugged his shoulders. Well, okay, I'll be Endeavor then. And I. The green-haired boy jumped up in excitement. I'll best Genie. What are you talking about, Deku? Katsuki turned to him. You can't play a hero. You don't even have a quirk. Izuku blinked. Sure I can. This is just make-believe, Kachan. Yeah, but there is a limit. Katsuki said with a grin. Besides, we need a helpless civilian, right? That's your role. Izuku flinched. But I always play the civilian. That's right, because that's the best role for you. The brown-haired boy chuckled. Yeah, nobody would ever buy you as a hero, Deku. That's not true. My dad says I can be a hero too. PFFFHH ha. Katsuki quickly laughed. Of course he'd say that. He's your dad, he's just saying what you wanna hear. Don't tell me you actually believed him, right? That's not true. My dad wouldn't lie about that. Why you take that back, Kachan? And what if I don't? The boy punched a fist into the opposite palm of his hand, letting out a small explosion for emphasis. Izuku opened his mouth, but no sound left his throat. His arms fell to his side, head lowered. Sorry, Kachan. Thought so. Now let's go before we gotta go home. Thanks for wasting our time, Deku. Katsuki grunted. Inko, please, calm down, you'll wake up Izu. How can I calm down? The woman let out a gruff sigh. Sorry, Hisashi, it's just, you should have heard the tone he used. What kind of doctor looks at an 8-year-old child right in the eyes, asks what they want to grow up to be, and then just, acts so sarcastic about it? The woman let out a lengthy sigh. What makes someone think they can act that way to someone else's child, just because they're quirkless? Hisashi grabbed Inko, pulling her into his embrace. I know, I can only imagine how hard it was not to say anything. Inko let out another sigh, leaning onto her husband. Izuku didn't seem to pick up on the sarcasm, so I couldn't risk it. Another sigh. First thing tomorrow, we're finding a new pediatrician. No arguments from me. Hisashi sighed, before looking over at Izuku, sound asleep with his face buried in the corner of the couch. Until they heard the light hiccup coming from him, quickly realizing. Oh no, Izu. They both hugged their crying child as tight as they could. Hey, you're Midoriya-kun, right? Izuku flinched as two girls approached his desk. You, actually it's Midoriya, but. Oh, Midoriya, that's right. Hey, listen, Midoriya-kun, is it true? Geez, this is embarrassing. What she's trying to say is, we hear you know a lot about heroes, right? Well, We're super into heroes too. Yeah, and we were just, wonderin' if we could talk about 'em. Just share some stuff. Izuku blinked in disbelief. I mean, sure. I'd love to talk about heroes. Actually. He suddenly reached beside him, pulling out a notebook. I just finished my notes on my 4th hero analysis. This one's mostly about rookie heroes, but I still think there's plenty of good information too. Izuku blinked as one of the girls snatched the book out of his hands. Wow, that got ya to stop being nervous, huh? She giggled, as her friend flipped through the notebook. Holy crap, this is a lot of stuff. These are super detailed notes. Izuku blinked, taken a bit by surprise, but still kept a shaky smile on his face. Well, it's kind of a hobby, yeah. I bet this'd be really useful for someone training to be a hero. I almost wonder if I should ask for copies then. Another flinch from Izuku, but a more excited one. Oh, why you're going to train to be a hero? I could get you copies of all my notes. No problem. Really? Aw shuck. That'd be great, Midoriya-kun. Though what do you do with these notes, anyway? Is it really just a hobby? The other girl looked at the cover. Hero analysis for the future. You gonna sell this stuff or something? Izuku, again, flinched. And no, that's not. Well, the truth is, I'm planning on using them as inspiration, for when I train to be a hero. Everything got quiet. Why was everything so quiet? KSNRRRK. PHHBBDT. He actually said it. A boy suddenly jumped out from behind the door, followed by a bunch of other students, all barely able to restrain their laughter. I never thought he'd actually admit to it. How delusional can ya get? Why yeah, that'd be something to see. The Quirkless wonder saves the day. More laughter echoed around him, as Izuku lowered his head against his desk, hiding beneath his arms. Raiden let out a quiet sigh. Cruel stupidity, the eternal thorn on life's side. Izuku rubbed his sleeve at his eyes, not breaking out into a messy cry, but not being able to stop the water from flowing. I tried to keep in mind everything Dad would say. I really tried to believe, but even the sturdiest of boulders are cut through by the persistent drip of water. Izuku slowly nodded. D-. Dad used to say that too. He looked back at Raiden, forcing a small smile to his face. Did he get it from you? Raiden nodded. Yes, but I got it from someone else too, so. Quote. This got a light chuckle from Izuku, even as he cleared away his tears. Quote. I cannot tell you anything you have not already heard. From your father, from your mother, from the heroes you so admire. For millennia, ordinary people have made extraordinary acts, and just as many have tried and failed. I cannot tell you that you will become the hero you wish to be. And I cannot make you believe that you have the chance to do so, if you simply try, even as small of a chance as that may be. You know all of this. And you know better than anyone whether it works, or does not, to be repeated the same lesson. At some point, it is down only to you to decide which lessons to take. Those that tell you that you can, or those that tell you that you cannot. Izuku slumped his shoulders, lowering his head again in defeat. All I can ask you, Midoriya Izuku, is what you want. The boy blinked, looking back at Raiden. The White Lotus only requires a participant to enter the tournament. If you wish to help, you need only agree to show up, and then forfeit at your own leisure. We may yet be surprised, and another competitor will rise above expectations, and win the tournament for the Earth Realm. Knowing the caliber of Shang Tsung's invited fighters, it feels unlikely. But a fighting chance, small as it may be, that is all we ask. So again, I ask you, will you join the tournament, Midoriya Izuku? Izuku's hand balled into fists. Quote. I will. Are you frightened by the doubts you've carried in your heart throughout your young life? I am. Raiden nodded, standing up from the floor, and looking back down at the boy. Do you want to fight regardless, and prove to yourself that you can rise above all the expectations thrown onto your shoulders? Izuku took in a deep breath, raising his head to look at Raiden, a determined look in his still wet eyes. I want to. Raiden grinned. Good answer. Izuku stood up as Raiden walked around the table, Kei's and Aim approaching him along with their father. Midoriya Izuku, your father gave me those same answers many years ago. And that look, he pointed at Izuku with a chuckle, he wore that same look in his eyes. Yours gave me a bigger chill, though, he chuckled again as Izuku blushed, getting all embarrassed again. Liu Kang had a long and arduous training, one that took 15 years of his life to reach the level he felt ready to take on Mortal Kombat. He reached forward, placing a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder, giving him a confident and reassuring grin. You have 2 years to catch up. Izuku blinked. Wait. What? We have postponed the tournament as long as we can. That is as much time as we could get. Izuku was speechless, babbling incoherent noises as his brain tried to restart to be able to form words again. BWHIB how? Oh, you have guts. Raiden gave him a light fist bump on the shoulder. Sometimes, that is all you need. Stranger things have happened, you know. But. Raiden turned from Izuku. Kei's, please take him back to Boraicho and Kung Lao. Will do. The goddess gave a short bow, before she approached the still babbling Izuku. She gently grabbed him by the shoulders, not only getting him to focus, but also shut up as he realized girl close girl touching brain screaming, allowing her to give him a gentle smile, and some words of encouragement. Midoriya-kun, as long as you remember, then you've got this. Izuku blinked, the words hitting something inside his brain. He couldn't quite figure out what that was at this point, but it worked to get him to stop worrying, even if only for a few seconds. He felt the weight leave his body, a gentle gust of wind carrying him off the floor as Kei's held him. Now, off you go. She suddenly turned, and swung Izuku like he were a rag doll, throwing him straight out of the open window before he could even scream. He opened his eyes, and blinked. He felt the grass beneath him, and could hear the distant sounds of the city. He was back at the park. Just not where he was before. Izuku. He blinked, hearing the familiar voice of Cho-san. The old master quickly ran up into his line of sight, letting out a very lengthy and very tired sigh. Oh, good heavens, my boy. Huff. I really wish that old coot would give some warning next time. Boraicho screamed up at the clouds. Not long after, Lao would appear. He still wore a stoic expression, but Izuku heard him let out a sigh of relief just before the man held out his hand to help him stand. Are you all right, boy? Izuku took Lao's hand, standing back to his feet without a problem. Why yeah, then, he jolted, Cho-san. We don't have much time. What do you mean, Izuku? Please. And just like that, Izuku had fallen back down to his hands and knees, pleading to the old master, please accept me as your student. Boraicho and Lao blinked, the former looking at Lao for a second, before turning back to Izuku. My student, why you mean? Izuku raised his head again, looking at Boraicho with a determined look in his eyes. Please, train me for Mortal Kombat. Chapter text. And now, it's time for M Reports Where's That Star Now? Tonight, we bring you the dizzying highs and lows of America's once darling superstar, Johnny Cage. Born Jonathan Carlton, the blue-eyed actor from Venice Beach, California, his origin story remains elusive even for the few Cage fanatics. The Carlton family is notoriously secretive, so much of Johnny Cage's childhood remains a mystery, and even the usually chatty movie star tends to shy away from the subject. But his family's penchant for remaining out of the spotlight did little to slow down the young Jonathan's quest for fame and success. Jonathan Carlton dropped out of middle school and ran away from home, rebranding himself into the Johnny Cage we all remember in the next few years, a period as secret and elusive to the media as his childhood. At the age of 14, Cage had already taken various small roles in advertisements. His natural charisma earned him his first TV role in the martial arts drama, Wushu, as the lovable rogue street urchin, Pockets. Cage's major break came only a few years later, and the rocket to major stardom was undoubtedly fueled by his appearance in the longest-running American TV series Power Rangers. Playing Timmy Truxwell, the affable, if slow-witted, Green Ranger of the brightly colored quintet, Cage stole not only the hearts of the show's fans, but also the spotlight from the rest of the cast. Despite the troubled backstage rivalries, Hollywood was keeping a close eye on the young star in the making, and Cage's first role on the silver screen was soon to come. Dragon Fist entered American movie theaters, and while Cage's role as martial arts student Michael Grimm was yet again secondary, the 17-year-old actor made sure the spotlight had little choice but to remain on him, as he once again became the talk of the town, with movie critics having nothing but praise to give. The sequel was quickly thrown out onto a rabid fanbase, and Dragon Fist 2 Feet was an even bigger success, with Cage again playing second banana but only on paper to his co-star Bruce Changers, but both audiences and critics knew who the real star behind these movies was. Which didn't sit very well with the Hollywood veteran Changers, who gave the studio an ultimatum: either Cage goes, or he goes. Son of Dragon Fist exploded onto the box office, Johnny Cage's first starring role becoming a worldwide sensation, and cementing him as a household name. At just 18 years old, Johnny Cage was at the top of the world, and he quickly married his Son of Dragon Fist co-star Cindy Ford, herself an accomplished fourth-generation young actress. The power couple would quickly begin tearing up the box office: Aquatic Assault, 24 Karat Gold, The Gist of My Fist, and the award-winning Sudden Violence. Hit after hit, the name Cage became synonymous with cash. But the weather couldn't stay clear forever, and the warning signs were there from the start. Ninja Mime was a disappointment on US shores, but a success overseas, especially in Japan, where it seems any Ninja Mime movie is impossible to fail. Seven Poisons also limped into breaking even, and despite Cage Match showing there were still some golden eggs inside this goose, the follow-up, Exiting the Dragon of Death, proved to be Cage's first box office flop. But nothing could have prepared the studios for the sheer destructive power that was the ill-fated martial comedy, HWAAAAA! Exclamation mark single quote dot. The cursed production not only saw a rotating door of directors, but the troubles in the Cage household seeped into the set. The ugly divorce between Johnny Cage and Cindy Ford stalled production even further, the ex-couple becoming more and more difficult to get to work together, leading to the use of body doubles and CGI just to be able to complete several scenes. The movie proved to be dead on arrival, with abysmal reviews, and even the most loyal of Cage fans find it difficult to see any positives in this absolute stinker, and most people found more meat to chew on from the leaked set footage of the angry, drunken exchanges between Cage and Ford. After what he'd described to be only his second darkest period in life, Cage sought to rebound with the surprise sequel to Ninja Mime 2 Feet, which, much like its predecessor, disappointed in America, but was enough of a success in foreign markets that Ninja Mime 3 Feet ensured Cage still had a safety net to fall back on. Unfortunately for Cage, studio interest was beginning to dry, and the 22-year-old actor found himself relying on smaller and smaller appearances. But soon, disaster would strike. On an appearance in the hit comedy game show, Who's That?, a heated exchange between Cage and shock comedian Hector James quickly turned violent, as the former child actor socked James in the face after the comedian repeatedly called him a kung fu fraud. While Cage natics were quick to jump to the actor's defense, pointing out that the shock comedian was repeatedly pestering the actor, and going too far in his taunts about Cage's personal life, this did little to warm up Cage to the studios, and any kind of roles Cage may still have had lined up were quick to vanish. And what happened next? It seems Johnny Cage has gone into yet another period of isolation, away from the cameras. When, or even if, he ever shows himself again, his fans still await with bated breath to see the movie star with the iron fist rise up again for one last fight. But what do we think? While you can never rule out anything in the world of entertainment, perhaps the question shouldn't be if Cage will come back, but if we should even want him to come back. Perhaps the rocket fuel has all but dried up, and it's best to remember the actor as he was, and keep any possible future embarrassments caged up. We should sue. The small bald man fidgeted in his chair even as he shut off the television. I'm tellin' ya, we should sue. Davey, relax. No, I'm sorry, but I gotta say my piece. The man stood up. That right there was a personal attack. I'm tellin' ya, I'll get our lawyers, we'll sue him into the ground, there ain't a court in this country that would. I thought they were pretty fair, up until that last bit. The other man shrugged his shoulders. I mean, did you see last week's episode on Strains Makovich? They were on the guy, and he hasn't had half the stinkers I've had. Davy let out a brief sigh, rubbing his nose. Johnny, I know ya got a heart of gold, but that don't mean you should let these bottom feeders stomp all over ya. Davy, I really appreciate that you're looking out for me, but, the conversation halted when the door opened. Sorry I'm late, but I got your mail. Didn't manage to sift through it yet, but, the scrawny woman stumbled into the hotel room, her hair unkempt and her large thick glasses just barely hanging onto her face. Johnny Cage quickly jumped off his chair, walking over to her to take the stack of letters off her arms. Hey, relax, Jean. I'll handle that. You look like you could use an assistant yourself. The heck happened to ya? Did a hurricane blow by or something? Davy asked. I guess I wouldn't have noticed it, not while that tornado of garbage spewed from the TV. Jean let out a lengthy sigh. It was just horrible trying to find a way over here. I called 3 cabs, and in 2 of them, someone cut me off right before I could get in. And I got stuck inside a taxi with no air conditioning, in the middle of rush hour traffic. I left home 5 hours ago, and in. The woman let out a lengthy breath of pure relief when she got lead over to the chair, letting her whole body drop down onto it, and almost literally melt into it as she finally relaxed. Her quirk was a bit weird to see in person at first, but both Johnny and Davy were more than used to Jean's slime-like properties. And you say I shouldn't let people stomp all over me? Johnny said, earning a short snort from Davy. Fix her a coffee or something, will ya, Dave? Yeah, on it. The agent walked over to the machine, but hey, this talk ain't over, John. I ain't done convincin' ya about that lawsuit. Jean blinked in her partially melted form. Why? Who we suing? We're not suing anybody, Johnny answered as he took a seat at the dining table, already looking through the pile of letters. M Enterprises. Davy also answered. EMO. The wep out on Jai wash today, washin', it. Wah. Did. Hey Shay. They called him a no-good has-been loser. They did not call me a no-good has-been loser. Not in so many words. But I heard it in the tone with my own 2 ears. Thaish awful. Jean reformed her body enough to turn her head to Johnny. Did they at least mention the fly-high appearance? Not a peep. Davy answered as he handed her a cup of coffee. See, like I said, they had it out for. I am right from the start. Johnny sighed. Come on guys, they didn't mention it because there's nothing to mention. It's a straight-to-disc low-budget horror movie, everyone gets into those. Not to mention it's crap, so, really, they're doing me a favor by not mentioning it. Johnny, I keep tellin' ya, in this business, it doesn't make a difference whether you start in gold or trash. The important thing is letting the big shots know you're still in some demand, and if that means. What's this? Johnny interrupted as he held a bright red envelope in his hand, an uncommon sight already, but the fact it was sealed with an actual wax stamp made it even weirded. Especially as the wax seal held the image of a dragon's head in its center. Jean looked over and blinked. Oh, shoot, must have been a fan mail I let get mixed up, sorry, Johnny. Pretty fancy for fan mail, I gotta say. His curiosity piqued. Johnny took little time before he opened and unfolded the letter. With any luck, maybe some estranged eccentric uncle wants to meet me, and hand over some of his fortune to his only nephew. Davy let out a snort. Yeah, keep dreamin', although, that does remind me, I could probably get ya a role in Kashmir Gladys's next comedy. It's called Choose for Company, and it's about a prince who left his royal family to be with the woman he loves, and now they're meeting his parents to try and make up. I bet I could get you the role of the butler, no problem. Both Johnny and Jean turned to look at Davy. Davy, Kashmir may not be the last person in the world to want to work with me, but she'd still fight to the death for that spot. Oh, come on, because of that thing with you and her mother. That's old news. Water under the bridge. I doubt it. Jean said as her form began to melt again. Not happening. Davy, just gotta accept that. Johnny let out a breath, focusing back on the red letter and clearing his throat. To the esteemed I like this already Mr. Jonathan Cage. We would like to extend our formal invitation to the upcoming Mortal Kombat tournament. Mortal what now? A new MMA promotion. Johnny shrugged. Maybe. And resumed reading the letter. This martial arts tournament will take place within a year's time, inviting the greatest and most promising fighters from around the globe to compete for the title of Mortal Kombat champion, and prove themselves the very best humanity has to offer. Can't find a thing on this thing. Davy muttered as he was already searching on his phone for any mention of Mortal Kombat. Sounds fishy as all hell. I can smell it a mile away. No. It's gotta be legit. What makes ya say that? Johnny turned the letter, pointing his finger near the bottom. While the dragon logo was stamped on there, beside it was a second logo. This, Jean took on a more solid shape before continuing. That's William Boyd's seal. That old man's still alive. Apparently. Johnny looked back at the letter, and the seal of his old martial arts master's school. Hadn't heard from him in years, but the letter says he's the one who recommended me, and, well, the seal proves it. Davy shook his head. Well, okay, let's say old Bill did do that, and that this is legit, doesn't change anything. All the work you'd have to go through to get in shape, it'd eat up your whole schedule. Schedule that ya could be using to rebuild connections. Look, hey, how's this? I can definitely get us an in on Godzilla's New Year's party this year. Imagine that. Godzilla and Johnny Cage, the dream team up nobody knew they wanted, but now can't live without. Johnny rubbed his chin in thought. That does sound tempting. His eyes never left the letter, however, right. Clapping his hands, he stood up from his chair. Jean, call my trainers, all of 'em. Wait, John, sorry, Davy, but I've made up my mind. He grabbed his coat off the rack. I've been in way too much of a rut. I'm tellin' ya, I haven't felt alive since I was filming Ninja Mime, of all things. John, please, think about this a while longer. I'm done thinkin'. Johnny Cage got where he did because he did things he didn't think. Oh yeah, I can certainly see that. Davy balked again. Davy, trust me on this. This is exactly what I need. Nothing like a good kick in the rear to get yourself moving. It ain't your rear I'm worried about, John, it's your face. That's your moneymaker. Johnny opened the door as soon as he put on his coat, turning around to give his agent and assistant a trademark Johnny Cage win and smile. Then it's a good thing you partnered up with a martial arts prodigy, Davy. Trust me, nobody's getting near this pretty mug. Chapter text. Come on, Danny, don't tell me you're scared of a lil' rock. The young girl taunted, grinning down at her brother. I'm not scared. The boy stuttered, clearly scared. He looked down at the height they'd already climbed, and swiftly wished he hadn't, hugging the rock for dear life to get as much grip on it as he could. Hurry up then, we're almost to the top. The girl pushed forward, moving one hand after the next to crawl further up the boulder. She knew he'd follow her eventually. After an agonizing, thrilling few minutes, they'd finally done it, and arrived at the very top of the rock formation. They both slumped from exhaustion, wondering for a brief moment inside their heads if this was even worth it. But opening their eyes, and staring out into the vast landscape behind their grandparents' farm, as the sun began setting. They had the perfect seats to witness it. Told ya we could do it. Why, yeah. The boy smiled, taking a seat on the rock beside her, as they enjoyed the sunset and the first cool breeze of the oncoming night. But, how do we get down from here? The girl coughed to clear her throat. I'll think of something. Sonya. Her brother whined. Why did we even climb up here anyway? Because we could, she answered her twin with another smirk. Ain't it obvious? This was an awkward car ride. He liked to say it was the most awkward one he'd been in, but that was a lie. It was a pretty common occurrence when it came to dealing with the Blade twins. So, is he gonna be alright? He glanced at the rear view mirror, frowning with concern as the boy in his backseat groaned. He had to drive as slowly as possible if he didn't want to be cleaning up vomit out of his car. He'll be okay. The girl in the front seat just shrugged. Danny's a lightweight and a drama queen when it comes to being hungover, but he bounces back no problem. The man's expression flattened as he looked at her. Of course he's a lightweight. He's 14, Sonia. I'm frankly more worried you're dealing with this so well. Makes me think of all the times you might have pulled this stunt before, and not get caught. Sonia stuck out her tongue with an uncouth noise. Maybe I just got good genes. Granddad was quite the drinker, you know. She smirked as he let out a tired sigh. What's matter, Jax? Ya used to be cool, you know. There's a world of difference between looking the other way and letting you kids play video games for an extra hour, and giving you a pat on the back for sneaking into a nightclub, nearly putting your brother in an alcohol-induced coma, and getting into a fight with 3 grown men. 4 of them. She smugly correctly. That doesn't make it better, Sonia. He sighed. Jackson Briggs had always had dreams of settling down one day, get married, and have 2, maybe even 3 beautiful children, but after only knowing these brats for 4 years, he was seriously reconsidering that plan. Okay, first off, it so does. And second, Danny chose drink 'cause he was trying to impress some girls. I didn't force him do nothing. Ain't that right, Danny? She looked at the backseat, only receiving a quiet groan in response. See, he admitted it. Jax let out another sigh. And the fight, hey, the creep touched my butt first, and his stupid friends got in way of me teaching him a lesson in respect. She crossed her arms with a huff. And the police officer you knocked 2 teeth out of when she tried to break up the fight. Were you teaching her a lesson too? Okay, that part was just the adrenaline. But it was just a pair of crowns anyway, not like I actually kicked her real teeth out. You always find the silver lining in everything, don't you? Sonia let out a grunt. Hey, come on, what gives ya right get all judgy on me. Don't tell me ya never did something stupid when ya got drunk. I never touched a drop, and I don't plan to. If you don't believe me, your dad can vouch for it. Sonia immediately scoffed with a roll of her eyes. Oh, yeah, that I can believe. Heck, I'll bet liquor is pushed away from him by the sheer might of his zero-nonsense force field, so he can't even get near the damn thing. She turned her head away with another huff. Probably why he couldn't come and pick us up himself, I reckon. Another sigh left Jax. Sonia, I told you, your dad's not here because your mom didn't want him finding out. Yeah, I'll bet, she grumbled, probably because he'd demand we spend a night or 2 in jail, and that'd turn into a big ol' news story in this dust bowl of a town and mess with dear ol' mama's perfect family picture. Hey, now that's the adrenaline still talking, because I know you don't believe that. Jax interrupted. Look, if you want to be mad at your old man, I find it hard to stop you. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend Herman doesn't straddle a very steep cliff into absentee father territory, so I'll give you a pass, but don't go talking about your mama that way. Erica's a saint. I know it, and so do you, so don't go kissing her until you've said your apologies, all right? Sonia didn't give a verbal response, only letting out an odd grunt. Thankfully for Jax, he recognized that that grunt was just Sonia's way of begrudgingly admitting someone other than her was actually right. Good. He said, and, look, as someone who works with your dad, and frankly, probably sees him more than you do nowadays, trust me when I say, the man wants nothing more than to be able to go home and spend time with all of you. He immediately raised a finger to interrupt another snarky comment from Sonia, and before you say anything, let me say. I get it, I wasn't exactly close to my old man growing up either, and for reasons closer than you may think. Sonia frowned slightly at this. Was your dad the town's big military hero who can do no wrong too? Hey, I said close, not identical, he responded. No, my dad wasn't a colonel, but he was a respected teacher at the university, and a man who poured himself into his job. So much so that little Jax often complained that he cared more about his students than his own son. And it's easy to think that way when you're a kid, and it's nobody's fault. Kids focus on the here and now more than adults, They aren't thinking about what's gonna happen the next day, or the next week, or the next month, or when their parents or friends are gonna have the time for them. All that matters is whether they're there when you need them, or when they aren't, and that sticks with ya. That's just how the human brain's evolved, for whatever reason, so again, it ain't anybody's fault. Another grunt left Sonya. Okay, then why are you chewing my ear off if it ain't my fault? Because while I can't tell you to stop feeling how you feel, I can ask you to try and hit the pause button long enough that you can understand what you feel. He said, just as they were starting to near the Blade household. Look, Sonya, I'm not trying to tell you this to scare you, or guilt you into anything. I spent my whole childhood holding a grudge towards my father because I felt he wasn't there for me, and that the reason he wasn't there for me was because he didn't care about me. And I didn't learn the truth about how that man thought the world of me until after he was already dead. It ain't something I blame myself for, and there certainly could have been an effort on his part as well. I'm not denying that, and I'm not denying that's not the same in this situation, but the car came to a stop right at Blade household driveway. All I regret is not taking my mama and my aunt's word when they told me how much my father loved me. I don't want you to have that same regret, Sonya. That's all. Sonya's expression was firmly locked into a scowl, but one that looked incredibly forced from where he was sitting. And then she let out another "I see your point but don't want to admit it" grunt, Jax allowing a smile to make its way to his face. Troublesome as she may be, he knew she was a smart girl, and would at least think about this for a while. Danny, on the other hand, he knew the boy just followed along with what Sonya did, so as long as she changed for the better, he'd be alright. I really need the bathroom. Okay, let's get you two inside. I know this car is old, but that doesn't mean it's a toilet just yet. It's fine, Jax, Sonya said, stopping him before he got out of the car. I'll take him. You sure? It's really no trouble, it's fine, she answered as she got out of the car, giving him a small smile. We've been enough of a pain in your butt for one night. We'll face Mom on our own. One night, girl, try a lifetime in just 4 years. He joked. But, well, okay. If you say so, you two have a good night. And Sonya, look, I know. She grinned a bit more cheerfully. Pause button. I'll keep that in mind. That's a promise. Jax nodded, fully believing she would do so. Now, come on ya lazy bum. She grabbed her brother by the jacket, pulling him onto a seated position before wrapping his arm around her shoulder, helping him stand up by keeping him leaned on her. We've got an hour-long sermon to sit through, and I ain't gonna be only one T, hear it? You're sharing that with me. Danny let out another groan. Jax, the young woman stopped and quickly cleared her throat. I mean, immediately, she swung up her hand to her forehead in a salute, Major Jax. I've been looking everywhere for you in this maze. The older man chuckled. Typically, is Major Briggs, Corporal Blade. Yeah, but I kicked your butt at Road Warriors enough times when I was 10, so I think I get special permission to still call you Jax. She grinned. Well, can't argue with that. He again laughed, before the two quickly hugged. Good to see ya, Sonya. It's great to see you too, Jax. How are you holding up? Sonya sighed as they pulled apart, shrugging her shoulders. One day at a time, still. I'm just glad to not be pushing pencils anymore, and being back on the field. You sure you're ready? Jax couldn't help himself but ask. Look, there's really no shame in. Jax, please, it's fine. She gave him a smile. I'm fine. I passed every physical and psych exam they gave me. I'm not about to go rogue or anything. That's not what I was. I know, it's a figure of speech. She chuckled. But, seriously, I'm ready. Jax took a moment, staring down Sonya for a few seconds, before he let himself smile again. All right, I trust you, and not a moment too soon. I'd hate to have to take down these guys without you around. Oh ho, trust me, I'd be around whether or not I got cleared. She smirked, cracking her knuckles for emphasis. It's another joke, Jax. She frowned. Geez, does everyone lose their sense of humor when they get promoted to major? No, We just learned to hide it better. He smirked back at her, but before they could exchange any more banter. Ah, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware you must be Miss Blade, correct? The suited man quickly asked as he entered the room. Everyone is ready, but I'm afraid the interpreter's yet to. That's okay, we don't need one, Jax assured him. United States Special Forces training is rough, but you pick up on a lot of helpful stuff. Yeah, you can't even get a passing grade unless you learn at least 4 new languages. Sonya added with a smug grin. So lead the way. The man blinked, but quickly nodded. Very well, right this way. Location: Hong Kong. Time of day: 11:45. Morning. In some respect, the first real morning for Sonya in the past 20 or so months. All that time spent barely distinguishing day from night, the tossing and turning in her bed, the failure in finding more reasons to actually get out of said bed, it all felt like a distant memory. She had a chance to make it right. She had to make it right. The USSF agent stepped into the medium-sized meeting room, already filled with not only police officers, but several well-regarded and trusted local heroes with years of experience beneath their masks. The suited man stepped up to the head of the table, clearing his throat and getting everyone's attention. Now, since everyone is here, we'll get this meeting started. Major Jackson Briggs, if you please. Jax stepped up as the suited man stood aside, bowing his head slightly. Thank you. He then faced the crowded room. All right, I'm sure we all want to get this out of the way, so I'll keep it brief and to the point. He picked up the small remote on the table, turning on the monitor in the wall behind him to bring up the slide. About 4 weeks ago, the U.S. Special Forces intercepted this. The image of a red letter appeared on screen, in Cancun, Mexico, during a drug lab raid. The man in charge, and recipient of the letter, was one Grendel Obeeker, a wanted criminal in 3 continents, with well-documented ties to the reason we're here. He changed slides, showing various images of multiple criminals and villains, all surrounding a very distinctive logo, 2 dragons face to face, with a knife in between. That's the Black Dragon clan insignia, correct? A man in wolf-shaped armor asked. Correct. Jax nodded. For decades, the Black Dragon clan was one of the most dangerous and powerful criminal cartels in the Americas. Their reach was so great, they even began expanding into Asia through Japan. But as of a little under 2 years ago, their influence has dwindled with the disappearance. The slide switched again, this time to show what few photos existed of a single man, with a metal plate seemingly fused onto one side of his face, of their leader. A man we know only as Kano. Jax paused, sparing a short glance at Sonya, and briefly seeing a look of pure disgust at merely looking at a photo of the man. She quickly realized he was looking, however, and did her best to return to her professional demeanor. He then turned back to the crowd. Unfortunately, even with Kano's disappearance, his men remained fiercely loyal. Obeeker shot himself before he could be captured, and any secrets he may have had died with him. And the problem with the Black Dragon is, when one of them dies, the others hear about it, and they know to retreat back into their shells and disappear all over again. Normally it could have taken years to get a single clue as to the location of another one of their operations, but, he changed the slide back to the red letter. Obeeker forgot to destroy this before he made his exit. The letter is an invitation to a martial tournament, something called Mortal Kombat. It's not listed in any officially sanctioned martial arts organization, and certainly not on any PPV listings, so clearly we're dealing with an illegal underground tournament. HMPH. A woman dressed in a classical witch's outfit, if that outfit were made out of clouds, scoffed. To think such uncouth institutions still exist nowadays. Surely they'd know this is the worst place to host a tournament such as this, right? The law has been very firm in stamping out such displays of wanton bloodshed and death for years. Yes, hosting this tournament in Hong Kong would be next to impossible, but the invite makes it clear the tournament isn't held here. This is just where the fighters will gather, before being taken by boat to the actual, still unknown, site. He changed the slide to show photos of one of many docks in the area, along with a small hotel nearby. This is where we believe the gathering will take place. This hotel had been abandoned for years, only opening at the beginning of this month. And almost instantly, it was filled up with guests from pretty much all over the world. More photos showed up, showing various photographs of more individuals. Some of these faces may be familiar to you. As we say back home, it's a real who's who of the criminal world. Mob enforcers, escaped villains, you name it. The screen lit up with mugshots of the identified men and women, alongside their photos taken mere weeks ago. So, a man whose entire head was a large pair of scissors spoke, "You think this tournament may be a black dragon front of some kind, to bolster their numbers?" Before Jax could answer, "No. The black dragon have nothing to do with this. But it's possible the one behind it may be interesting in getting their attention." Sonya answered for him, the crowd looking at her a bit curiously. "Ah, yes, this." Jax motioned to her, as Corporal Sonya Blade. "She's a specialist when it comes to the black dragon. I can't tell a lie. She seems a lil young for a specialist to me," a dog man spoke. Sonya's frown quickly deepened, but Jax stepped in before she could answer back. "Yes, Corporal Blade is young, but she was even younger when she became the first ever person to actually get close to Kano in over 2 decades. She's proven time and again to be able to think like how the dragons think, unlike anyone else, and if anyone can make lightning strike twice, and sniff out whatever hole Kano and his men are hiding under, I've no doubt in my mind she's the one." The crowd murmured, mostly looking impressed by Sonya, but there were clearly some who still wondered just what she could bring to the table. In any case, the wolf-armored man spoke again, "If the Black Dragon aren't behind this Mortal Kombat tournament, I take it you have reason to believe they're still involved somehow." Jax nodded. "We actually started our investigation, with help from local law enforcement, with the thought this could be a Black Dragon front, but that possibility grew less likely. But we didn't come out of this empty-handed." The screen changed again, this time showing the distant photos of 2 figures, one a small, silver-haired young woman, being accompanied by a much larger man in a thick brown coat, just barely hiding the shaggy brown fur that covered his body. These photos were then accompanied by others, taken from various sources. Their code names are Zookeeper and Beerhead, real names unknown. Wanted criminals in Japan, belonging to a small organization calling itself the Wild Villains. The Wild Villains have had ties with the Black Dragon in the past, and we have strong reason to believe they've kept that partnership alive and healthy. They're the only other confirmed connection to Kano and the Black Dragon we've found in this tournament, so they're as precious of a source of information as they can come." "Sounds simple enough," a man with a very lengthy braid spoke up. "All we gotta do is bust in, and capture as many criminals as we can then." "Sadly, it sounds simple, but it's not," Jax said. "There's just as many people in that hotel who don't seem to match any known wanted or former criminals. In fact, some of the invited are famous martial artists, MMA fighter, wrestlers, you name it. Plus, the hotel is located on a very busy street, so civilian numbers are high. If we cause too much of a disturbance, we could risk getting them caught in the crossfire. With many criminals in one place, we'd practically be gift-wrapping them hostages. There's more than that," Sonya joined in again. "If the capture of Zookeeper and Beerhead gets out, then the Black Dragon will hear about it. They'll just relocate all of their standing operations again, and any information we get out of these 2 will be outdated. We'll just be back at square one." Another quiet murmur filled the room, until the wolf-armored man spoke up again. "Then, this has to be conducted and finished in the utmost secret. It's not the best of situations to be in, I know, but it's all we got." Jax concluded, taking a seat at the table, with Sonya soon joining him. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're here because you're the most trusted. The Black Dragon have eyes and ears just about everywhere, and who knows the reach the people behind this tournament have as well. All of this information cannot leave this room, if we want this to work. The USSF has already made an outline of a possible plan." Sonya continued, "This meeting is here so we can all make whatever necessary changes, and ensure it's as airtight as possible. We've got to agree on it, memorize it, and in the end, we'll only have one shot at doing this right." She looked over at the gathered heroes and police officers as the folders were passed around with all the necessary information for what was to come. "We've only got 1 week before the start of the tournament. Hope you guys have your schedules clear. Chapter text. The sound of footsteps echoed down the long hall, before the skinny thug burst into the room. Wait. Don't shoot. He immediately begged at the room full of armed men aiming at him. It's me. It's just me. Jesus Christ, what the hell do ya think you're doing? One of the armed men snarled at him. You nearly gave us a heart attack. The skinny man bowed profusely as he stepped into the safe room, making sure to close the door behind. I know. I'm sorry. I know, but. Another man with a large rhinoceros horn snorted. Nobody cares. What's the situation upstairs? The skinny man started. Well, another man with brown hair shaped like a pair of horns said. Everyone's dead. What? Why you're full of it. No way two guys could have taken out everyone. It's true. The skinny man said. I barely managed to escape with my life here. Everyone else wasn't so lucky, okay. A low grunt left the man at the end of the door, smoking his cigar as he played solitaire while he waited. You weren't lucky, dumbass. Boss, what do you? The older man looked up from his game, staring at his skinny underling with an icy glare. They let you live, and you led 'em straight towards us. Boss, look, I didn't mean to. Before the skinny man could finish, a bullet had already made its way through his skull. The older man slipped his gun back into the holster beneath his jacket, letting out a frustrated sigh. Ain't there any good help nowadays? My great-grandfather would be ashamed at the pathetic lot I got saddled with. Boss, a gorilla man spoke. I hear more footsteps. Taking a lengthy drag off his cigar, the older man did his best to appear confident despite the growing sweat on his forehead. Shoot whoever opens that door. Don't matter who it is. The footsteps slowly drew closer, two pairs of them growing louder as they approached the only door into the room. Nero De Niro was of a dying breed. The criminal organization world wasn't quite what it used to be, but his grandfather had told him all the stories of the glory days of Italy's golden age of villainy. He'd always hoped to bring back those days, and make his grandfather, and his great-grandfather proud. For a while, he almost thought he could do it. He'd made great strides in putting some of Venice's heroes in his pocket already, and he had enough government connections that the police couldn't do anything against him. He'd been careful. He'd been so careful, and done everything right, but he was too soft in the end. He tried to work together with his competition instead of crushing them when he had the chance. He always said that old wolves needed to stick together. And this is how they repaid his sense of camaraderie. The door wasn't forced open. It wasn't kicked open. The man simply turned the knob, using a key taken from one of Nero's most trusted and deadly enforcers. And he simply let himself in. Kill the bastards. The sound of gunfire filled the room, 11 men shooting wildly to defend their boss from the assailants. Their bullets would never reach them, as a thick wall of ice was quickly erected to act as a shield. And in the next instant, Nero was seeing the blood leave his men. It had happened fast, but he saw what had happened. The water coating the ice shield's surface had leapt off of it, thinning into needle-like shapes as they were refrozen, and flew into the warm bodies of his bodyguards. The ice wall shattered, a sudden shadow leaping and drawing a lengthy blade, swiftly finishing the job as it flowed through the air in an uninterrupted motion, each strike aimed directly at the neck of every man for a quick death. Nero quickly reached for his own gun again, aiming it at the blur as it made its way through his bodyguards, but it was too late. The second assailant had reached him, touching his gun to instantly render it useless by freezing it completely. And before Nero could do anything else, the ice had stretched past the gun and over his arm, down his torso, and firmly freezing his body to his chair, leaving only his head exposed. Who the hell, or why you? Nero tried to keep his composure, but between the bone-chilling cold and his genuine confusion, it was hard to do so. The man who stood before him was dressed almost entirely in blue and black, his face covered by a blue mask and hood, leaving only his eyes visible to look at Nero. The other one wore the same outfit, but with a more purple-ish blue color, as opposed to his partner's lighter blue. Nero De Niro. The ice user spoke. Your enemies wished that you be given this message. For society to prosper, the rats must be culled. What are you? Nero grit his teeth, the realization dawning on him. Someone paid you FF for this, right. I can pay you double. I promise I. Nero felt the ice thicken around him, crawling up his throat. Wait. Okay, triple. I'll triple what you have. The blue-clad man didn't react, simply letting the ice continue to make its way up Nero's throat, looking to freeze him completely until, The assassin was distracted, reaching up to his own neck. Question mark. The other assassin blinked, looking to his partner. Sub-Zero. What's? He's near. The assassin echoed, but instantly knew what his partner meant, looking around the room on high alert. Of all times, it had to be now. Nero blinked, looking between the two assassins, not understanding a word they were saying now. What are you FF freaks talking about? Sub-Zero didn't answer, ignoring the crime boss as he focused on the room around them. He knew all too well the foe they were up against, and that he always lurked closer than expect. Hydro, behind you. Hydro reacted as fast as he could to jump to the side, but the sharp kunai still sliced into his shoulder. He could feel that, had he not jumped, the strike would have been powerful enough to cut through the protective padding of his suit, and cut into his shoulder. He tried to counterattack as fast as he could, slicing his own blade at the foe that struck him, but all he sliced through was a shadow. Sub-Zero immediately turned around, raising his arms to successfully block the kick he knew was coming, but when he tried to touch the man's leg to freeze it, he had already jumped off. This only made Sub-Zero launch himself forward right away, swinging an open palm strike at his enemy's chest, but getting the blow redirected with a well-placed strike to it. Without slowing down, Sub-Zero continued to strike at the man, but his attempts to get his hands on him were repeatedly foiled, the blindingly fast exchange of blows ending with neither man managing to land a solid strike on the other. It wasn't until Hydro gathered the cold water from Sub-Zero's ice that the exchange was interrupted, the liquid tendrils looking to strike their foe, only for the man to vanish into thin air once again. Hydro was prepared this time, turning around and quickly using his sword to parry the kunai blow that nearly stabbed into his spine. The clash of metal rung out as both men's blades stopped the other from striking flesh, but Hydro was so focused on his enemy's blade, he didn't think about him simply kicking him in the stomach and force him to bend over. Before the kunai could be swung down onto the back of his exposed neck, Sub-Zero rushed in to shove his partner out of the way, and grabbing his foe's wrist as it fell down. The ice began to quickly crawl over the wrist, hand, and down the man's arm, before it suddenly erupted with fire that not only burst through the ice, but forced Sub-Zero back and away from the flames. The exchange mustn't have even lasted for a full 60 seconds, and Nero could barely keep up for half of it. All he knew was the old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Hey, why you there? He addressed the mysterious man who, while he was dressed in a similar outfit to the others, mask and all, his outfit looked a lot more torn and worn out, his colors of choice being black and a dark shade of yellow. Hey, if you save me, I'll pay you. Why you hear that? I can give you anything you want. Money, chicks, blow, why you name it, why you can even. The man in yellow didn't even need to say a word. The glare he gave Nero was enough to completely silence the man, especially when Nero just now realized the man had no pupils, his eyes being entirely pale white. You're becoming desperate, Scorpion. Sub-Zero spoke up, his focus entirely on the man in yellow. It's 2-on-1. You can't win this battle, and you know it. He turned his attention back to Sub-Zero, Scorpion's eyes narrowing and expressing his disgust and anger even as his face was almost entirely covered up. There could be an army standing between us, Lin Kuei, and it wouldn't make a difference. There's nothing that will stop me from getting my revenge. We'll see about that, Hydro shouted, gathering the water and blood that poured out of the bodies on the floor, swinging it like whips towards Scorpion, who easily dodged out of their way. This served to get Scorpion into Sub-Zero's path, the ice user quickly swinging a blade forged out of ice against Scorpion, but it was parried by his kunai. Scorpion then swung his arm forward, letting out another burst of flames to force Sub-Zero back, and allowing him to focus on jumping in between Hydro's liquid whips as he swung them again. Knowing that as long as Hydro kept his distance he'd be at a disadvantage, Scorpion acted as soon as his feet touched the floor. Something, seemingly a piece of bone carved into a blade, jutted out from the side of his body, and he quickly grabbed it. He pulled on the bone piece, which seemed to be attached to some kind of chain or whip made of bone and tissue that left from his body, before he threw the large blade-shaped end towards Hydro. The water user tried to react as fast as he could, but the chain reached him before he could make any defensive move, not helped by the fact he heard the bone and flesh construct hiss at him, a mouth with rows of sharp teeth opening and biting down on his left thigh. Before he could even gasp or cry out in pain, however, Scorpion had yanked on the chain to throw Hydro to the ground and drag him across the floor towards him. The living chain let go of Hydro's leg just as Scorpion lunged towards him, already aiming his kunai to stab him on the stomach, but Sub-Zero jumped in again to grab Scorpion's arm and redirect his enemy with an over-the-shoulder throw, slamming Scorpion to the ground. The man in yellow didn't waste any time, however, quickly swinging his leg up to kick Sub-Zero in the forehead even while he lay on his back, and before Sub-Zero could recover, Scorpion had already vanished from the floor, reappearing in a burst of flames and smoke behind the ice user to swing the kunai to his neck. Much to his growing frustration, Sub-Zero was quick to react and block the attack by lifting his forearm to meet with Scorpion's, preventing the blade from getting near his neck. Sub-Zero quickly forged a new ice blade from seemingly thin air, smaller due to having to make it so quickly, which quickly clashed with Scorpion's follow-up attacks. Hydro jumped to his feet mere seconds before Sub-Zero and Scorpion broke away from each other, quickly gathering more water and blood, creating multiple individual puddles in midair. The puddles then flew towards Sub-Zero, who quickly swung his arms through them, immediately freezing them as soon as he touched them, and allowing the now sharp icicles to fly towards Scorpion. None of them hit their mark, Scorpion either sidestepping or intercepting the icicles with his weapon. In the process, his free hand reached behind him and into a hidden pocket on his belt, allowing him to immediately throw the objects as soon as the icicles were dispatched. Sub-Zero saw the gleam of the metal throwing stars coming his way and was quick to dodge, with Hydro merely following in his lead before he even realized Scorpion had thrown anything. As the fight resumed, in the midst of all of it, Nero still wasn't sure what the hell he'd gotten caught in. But he could tell that the ice around him was quickly weakening, letting him start to move and pry himself away from it. D-. D damn it. N Nero D dinero I isn't going down. NN not TT today. Once he got his right arm free, Nero grinned. His hand simply detached from his wrist, dropping to ground as it squirmed. It took a few seconds for it to flip over and begin crawling between the dead bodies of his ex-bodyguards until it reached the one he needed. The hand crawled up a large man with a salamander mutation, and its fingers dug straight into the back of his head. The Dinero family quirk always revolved around puppeteering one way or another. For Nero, it allowed him to take possession of the dead. The salamander man's corpse began to move and rise onto his hands and knees, keeping a low profile as the intruders continued to fight. With a twitch of his finger, Nero activated his ex-bodyguard's quirk. It was subtle at first, but as the corpse began gathering more heat inside of him, his chest started to glow and expand, the corpse bloating up as the fire inside of it quickly gathered. "Hey!" Nero shouted. "Sayonara, bitches!" The corpse opened its mouth, finally launching a massive ball of burning flames towards Scorpion, Sub-Zero and Hydro. Without slowing down for a single moment, Sub-Zero immediately slammed his hands on the floor, just as Hydro jumped closer to him, a thick wall of ice being forged around them into a protective shell. The fire raged around them, setting the entire room and the corpses within on fire, but the ice shell held strong with Hydro manipulating more water onto it, to allow Sub-Zero to freeze it again and rebuild any layers that had melted away. It didn't take very long, only a few seconds, before the fireball was gone. Sub-Zero broke through his ice shell with ease, but with half the room still in flames, they couldn't exactly stick around for long. Not that Sub-Zero was giving that much thought, as he quickly looked around the room for any trace of Scorpion. Hydro, meanwhile, grabbed a throwing knife from his suit's pockets, and before Nero could begin charging a second attack, Hydro threw the knife, letting it meet with Nero's forehead, piercing the skull and quickly killing him. Hydro let out a short sigh when the salamander man's corpse collapsed immediately afterwards, but they didn't have much time to relax. We need to. He turned to Sub-Zero, whose focus was still clearly elsewhere. Kue-san. He grabbed his shoulder. We have to leave. Sub-Zero finally turned to Hydro when he grabbed his shoulder, and simply nodded without a word. Their job was done here. A blind man sat at a park bench, tossing seed to the chirping birds that gathered in front of him. A few minutes afterwards, two figures would approach the area, and take their seats on the opposite park bench. A man with snow-white hair and beard, weary eyes, and wearing a scarf, and a younger man with orange hair, a beanie hat tucked in low to nearly obscure his eyes. The blind man smirked, reaching up with his hand to rub at one of his earlobes. "Wonderful day to meet with the forest. You should be careful there," the bearded man answered. "You never know what demons hide in the shadows," the redhead concluded. The blind man chuckled. "All right, enough of that. My cone of silence is up. No need for the drama anymore. Secrecy is one of the founding pillars of the Lin Kuei," the bearded man quickly said. "This drama is vital to keep it that way." Again, the bling man just chuckled. "Gosh, you really are a stick in the mud, ain't ya? Didn't take much from your old man, that's for sure." The bearded man let out a quiet, but clearly frustrated grunt. Quickly sensing the air turn cold, the redhead spoke up. "Oh okay, I'm all for chatter, but we've got to finish this, right?" At his intrusion, the blind man seemed to gain a frown, but he had to relent. Fine, let's get this over with. I figure you got the job done." "Correct," the bearded man answered. "The Dinero crime family is dead." Another chuckle by the blind man. "Well, I'm sure the Prime Minister will be quite glad to hear that. He was very generous with his payment to get rid of those rats, as he put it." He chuckled again. "I'm sure he'd make for a great client. It's almost a shame we got a hit on him last week, but that's just how life is sometimes." The blind man turned his head away from them. "So, did you have any trouble during the job?" No trouble," the bearded man answered. This earned him a worried look by the redhead, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Good, as expected from the grandson of a grandmaster. I'd go so far as to say our current one should start getting a little worried." The bearded man frowned at this. "My life is for the Lin Kuei. My loyalty is to the grandmaster. I don't appreciate the insinuation of treachery." "Ooh, definitely hit a nerve." The blind man quickly raised his arms, but still kept a grin on his face. Hey, I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to give ya a compliment." He quietly chuckled, crossing one leg over the other as he gained a slightly more knowing tone. "Although, rumors are always inevitable, everyone knows you've grown considerably more confrontational with the Grandmaster over the last few years. I assure you, those rumors haven't a leg to stand on," the bearded man roughly stated. "The Grandmaster and I have our disagreements. That's all there is to say. Are we done here?" I'm afraid not. We've got another assignment, and the Grandmaster personally selected you for the job." Another laugh. "I'd like to call it a show of great respect, but, well." The bearded man let out growl. "Just spit it out. You're wasting time." "Oh, all right," the blind man grinned. "I'm afraid I must bring you the bad news. You've been drafted into the Shang Tsung job." "Is that it?" The blind man quickly cackled again. "Ooh, such confident stoicism. You really are something else. Even while your little partner's already trembling beside you, no less." The redhead flinched, but he couldn't exactly deny it. As soon as he heard the name, he couldn't help but feel a chill run up his spine. Every Lin Kuei warrior knew of the Shang Tsung job, and knew of it as a death sentence to anyone given that responsibility. For decades now, the Lin Kuei had received contracts to bring down this Shang Tsung, and assassin after assassin, none of them ever came back. He wanted nothing more than to argue with this decision, but... "When do we leave?" The bearded man showed zero fear, so the redhead couldn't exactly bring himself to show his own weakness. "Oh, it's not so simple," the blind man said. "The job will be a bit different this time around. You're wasting time again." A sigh left the blind man. "I thought you were supposed to be patient one. But, Okay. The blind man reached into his jacket, pulling out a bright red envelope. Our contractor intercepted this letter. It is an invitation to a martial arts tournament. Mortal Kombat. Never heard of it. Nobody seems to have. The blind man shrugged. But our contractor is confident that Sung is behind this. Instead of a usual hit, you've been chosen to participate in the tournament. You will play by its rules. The opportunity to strike will surely reveal itself in time, but that's for you to figure out. The bearded man nodded. Understood. But you still haven't said when we leave. That's what I mean by different. The letter was sent 6 months ago, and at that time, the tournament was set to happen within a year. That means you've got a whole 6 months ahead of you before you can actually participate. With a flick of his wrist, the blind man sent the red letter flying, easily being caught the bearded man. The look on his face made it clear he wasn't happy by the unsubtle delivery of the letter, but whether the blind man could pick up on that or not was anyone's guess. Look at it this way, you've got 6 months to prepare. Or, if you want, write out your will. The redhead let his displeasure with the blind man's attitude be well known, gritting his teeth and having to hold himself back from saying anything, but the frustrated growl leaving his throat definitely didn't pass by unnoticed. The blind man chuckled, but whether it was because of the redhead, it remained a mystery. Well, in the meantime, that's all I have for you. He stood up from the bench. Feel free to enjoy Venice for the time being. Wonderful place, isn't it? Ah, how I'd love to go on just one gondola ride, but, oh well, no rest for the wicked, right? With another chuckle, the blind man walked away from the two, quickly taking his leave. Things were quiet for a few moments. The redhead looked at where the blind man walked off to, and then back at the bearded man who was already reading the red letter. He wasn't trying to hide the worry on his face, even as the bearded man seemed to not notice it. He thought long and hard about what to even comment on, but he knew bringing up the mission was just going to end with him stonewalled right now. He'd have to bring up his concerns some other time. So, why didn't you tell him about? There's nothing to tell. The bearded man said. Kue-san, I'm really sorry, but I really can't agree with that. It's been 2.5 years, and he's still chasing you. Unless you're trying to say you think he died last knee. No, he didn't. Another blunt statement. He's going to bide his time before he strikes again. Then why won't you go to the Grand Master, and tell him about this? He may know what to do. The bearded man let out a sigh, standing up from the bench, with the redhead quickly following. Scorpion is my problem, Kazunari. Not the Lin Kuei's. I'm the one who must deal with him. You shouldn't have even gotten involved last night. You can't possibly be serious. The redhead argued. I'm not going to sit around and watch you get attacked, you know. He subtly, not really, but he believed it to be subtle, pouted. Besides, he came after me first. I had to defend myself too. He didn't get nearly as much of a reaction out of the bearded man as he hoped, but the short thoughtful hum was better than nothing. Well, the redhead mused out loud, you know, this is actually my first time in Italy. He looked back at the bearded man, and it is lunchtime, so, would be nice to experience some genuine Italian food. The bearded man looked down, and let out a small sigh, quickly offering a smile. Very well then, as repayment for dragging you into my problems, food's on me today. Thank you very much, Kue-san. The redhead grinned widely, but he couldn't smile quite as genuinely as he hoped. It wasn't a feeling he could explain, and certainly not one he could ever convince anyone of. He tried to ignore that feeling, bury it deeply, and he hoped never to have to face it again. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.